In a town forgotten by time, where trouble rides in with the wind and legends fade slower than scars, they chose the wrong person to provoke, and by the time they realized, it was already too late. Dust drew a veil over Brackenridge at noon, as if the earth herself wanted to hide the town's small cruelties. The wind worried the hanging sign of the Temperance Hall until it squeaked like a scold. Outside the granary, a crowd gathered beside the long slatted crib where last year's yellow cobs had cured. Men leaned on fence rails. Women folded there, arms over aprons starched stiff with resolve. Children stared with the greedy hunger of those taught it's safe to watch when a lesson isn't for them. Tamsin. Calder smelled dried husks and mouse droppings before she saw the corn cribs inside. The scent summoned little pricks along her throat, memories of harvest days and laughter. Today the smell pressed on her chest like a hand. "Step lively," said Deputy Owen Marr, whose jaw carried old acne pits like thumbprints in wet clay. He clamped leather cuffs around her wrists and pretended not to feel the tremble he brought into her bones. "The committee don't care for delay. The committee don't care for truth either," she said, and heard the burr of her mother's mountain vowels in the retort. It steadied her. She kept her eyes forward, because shame feeds on eye contact, and because looking at Decker Voss, who smirked from the edge of the crowd, the man she'd need to keep his hands where his words said they'd never go, would only deepen the bruise forming under her ribs. Pastor Abner Creel raised a palm, and the murmur softened. His palm was broad and pink, the palm of a man who believed God had made him flame-proof. "It grieves us to chastise a neighbor," he intoned. "But sin unrebuked is sin invited." His eyes slid over Tamsin with the cool inventorying of a shopkeeper. "Temptation has its own sermon, Miss Calder. You preached it without words." A few women nodded. Hetty Vale folded her handkerchief as if snapping a neck. Tamsin glanced at Hetty's daughter, Prue, who had tried last winter to trade her wedding band for flour at the very store where Decker Voss kept his ledger like a trap, and whose face had gone the gray of old pewter when Decker had insisted the price might be settled behind the curtain. Prue didn't meet Tamsin's eyes. Now survival turned neighbors into wobbly mirrors. Sometimes they reflected you. Mostly they tried not to. "They found her," Decker called, voice smooth with victory. "Behind the mill, skirt askew, hair down, speaking filth to a decent man." His lip curled, just enough to promise more. He touched the bruise on his cheekbone, as if to remind himself it existed. Tamsin remembered her knee rising, the way his breath had stuttered into a whine. Remembered the moment the men from the Temperance Board had turned the alley's geometry against her. 3 bodies, 1 narrow. Exit, dignity forced to fold. The memory crawled like ants up the ladders of her ribs. "I was speaking to a stray dog," she said. The decent man came later. Laughter rose and died quick, because laughter was a coin. You could spend it wrong and find yourself poor. Deputy Marr spun her by the elbows. The corn crib's door was a slatted rectangle of weather-black boards, iron hasps chewed by rust. Harvest had emptied the crib, but not its purpose. It could hold shame same as it held cobs let wind and watching do their work. 2 hours, Pastor Creel said mildly, gesturing with a hand weighted by rings. "Time to cool the fever in your blood. You'll come out quieter." She stared at him and saw long afternoons when her mother had taught her to lay seams true without pricking a finger, saw tidy rows of stitches like fence posts in snow. Quiet had its uses. Quiet could be a knife if you knew where to cut. "Is Decker cooling his fever too?" she asked. "We address men separately," Creel replied, and the crowd smiled the way people do when they hear weather they can't change. The cuffs came off. The door yawned. The crib's interior was a thin-ribbed box of air and splinters. Sunlight slatted through the wall, carving the dust into even paragraphs. Deputy Marr pushed. She stepped inside, because stepping backward now would hand him more than he'd taken. The door clapped. The hasp caught. Decker hooked the padlock and snapped it shut himself, savoring the weightless ring of the finality. Tamsin stood very still until the crowd's noise settled into the long grass. Stillness kept the world from being a mouth that swallowed you. The crib's floor, raised on stone piers, hummed with the small sound of the prairie, mice nattering under boards, the thin claw of a wind that had learned to stretch itself through any seam. She set her palm on the slats. Heat had soaked into them all morning. It climbed her skin like a question. She answered by counting the nail heads in the nearest upright. 1, 3, 5 odd-numbered, because the carpenter had hammered in rhythm, maybe to a hymn, maybe to keep from thinking a crib could become a cage. Counting found a kind of floor that didn't bow with fear. Outside, the committee drifted into shade like ladies on a lake raft. They'd stay close. Discipline had to be seen. Men needed the example almost as much as women did, or else the men who wrote rules might notice they'd written themselves out of them. Children darted nearer the slats and pretended to be brave until their mother's fingers found their ears. Boy with a wet upper lip peered in. "Do you feel the devil in your mouth?" he asked, breathless. "Only when men lend him theirs," she said. He blinked at the answer's shape, then ran. She sent after him the ghost of a smile and felt how it stretched the skin above the bruise under her left eye. The wind changed. With it came the smell of horse, of old leather and iron oil, comforting in the way a barn at night is comfort, because it promises work and warmth and death in reasonable proportions. A rider had stopped on the road and hadn't moved on. She felt his watching the way you feel sunlight through closed lids. "Leave off spectating," Hetty Vale called toward the road. "Unless you've business with the committee." Silence from the rider. Hoof shifted. In the crib's pattern of light, dust danced like moths. Tamsin leaned and found a gap wide enough to see a heel, a stirrup, a wedge of trouser dark with trail. The horse's fetlock bore a scar like a stitched smile. You could tell a rider by his horse same as you could tell a seamstress by her thimble how the tool wore. What dents became permanent. Deputy Marr, who refused to feel awkward in any situation that put a woman behind boards, sauntered back with the satisfaction of a workman whose job makes him important. "Next time," he said, hooking his thumbs in his belt, "you'll think before you look a man in the eye." "I think now," she murmured. "It isn't hard." He hit the slats with his palm. The sound sounded like a slap on a pond. "No. Back talk in there," he said, and walked off, because it was easier to say a rule than to hold it in place. Afternoon lengthened like a spine being pulled. Heat gathered in the boards. Sweat ran down the valley of Tamsin's back. Breathing became work. Work became prayer. She kept her hands at her sides to stop them from worrying the splinters, because blood in the smell would court the wrong kind of attention from both rodents and men. It could have been easy to let the mind slip sideways into other afternoons. A dress falling from a line, the slap of it recaught, her mother laughing to see a child invent wind with her arms. But she had promised herself after the winter. She buried her mother in a drift behind the livery, because the ground was flint and the men said they'd dig when it thawed, that she would not step outside any moment if doing so made that moment dangerous. You survive honest, she told herself, or you survive long. Long without honest is a grave dug in installments. Around the crib, voices thinned and thickened as people came to take sides with their presence. Some women fretted loud enough to hear. Some chewed their lips and watched their own shoes. A fiddler named Arlen Finch played 2 measures of Wayfaring Stranger and quit when Hetty's glance cut the strings invisible. Decker Voss laughed in a way that curled the air. He told the blacksmith, May O'Rourke, that the town needed straightening before it needed horseshoes. May rubbed the steel dust from her knuckles and said nothing, because her forge ate gossip and spat coin. From the road came the scuff of boot leather on gravel. The rider had dismounted. Tamsin watched through the slat gap as a man walked slow, as if he'd been taught by quiet places. He had a rifle slung muzzle down, trail dust in the beard, sleeves rolled to elbows that had seen things they didn't. Talk back to. He paused in the shade of the granary roof and took off his hat. The gesture showed a strip of pale forehead like newly sawed wood. His eyes were the color of creek glass, brown pulled almost to gold by sun. "Mr. Pike," Hetty said, in the voice women used for men who kept to themselves until the world insisted it notice them. "We don't need help settling our accounts." Gideon Pike, to attach a name to his shape, inclined his head. "Didn't offer any," he said. His voice belonged to someone who sized truths like boards before building with them. "You're a stranger to church," Creel said politely, which in Brackenridge meant your soul was assumed to be badly dressed. "I keep my own Sabbaths," Gideon replied, "and my own company." Decker Vos smiled like a blade that had been licked clean. "You hunting trouble, Pike?" "Trouble don't need hunting," Gideon said. "It scents itself." He looked at the crib then, not at the crowd. His gaze met Tamsin's through the narrow gap, and something in his expression changed almost. Without the face moving, a hitch in a breath. A recognition that wasn't the traveling kind. She didn't flinch or hide. If a man must see you, let him see the whole ledger, humor, fear, the column where you keep the names of the ones who tried to writing yours. 2 hours, Creel repeated, as much to Gideon as to Tamsin now, as if time were a rule he'd invented and might take back if someone challenged the copyright. And then a hair-cutting and a pledge to temperance. That's all. Mercy does not abridge consequence. Who cuts his hair? Tamsin asked, and nodded toward Decker. He pledged nothing when he followed me behind the mill. That's slander, Decker snapped. He glanced quickly at the crowd to make sure they were on his side, and found enough faces turned his way to continue. I went to save her from herself. And how'd your face get in the way of your saving? May O'Rourke asked mildly, eyes still on her hands. The blacksmith's voice was a hammer that did not need to pound often to be heard. Decker colored, and hatred lit in him brighter than shame. Tamsin tucked it away in the place she kept stove ash and extra thread. You never knew when you needed. Gideon Pike leaned his shoulder to a post and pretended to watch the sky's weather. But Tamsin could feel the line that ran between his ribs and the crib's locked hinge, the way a hitch knot feels the pull of a load it was tied to hold. Some men were born to certain moments and spent their years trying to live small enough to dodge them. This looked like such a man, such a moment. Heat softened. The slatted shadow lengthened and ran like spilled ink along the floor. Hetty Vale and her circle brought stools and strong tea. They set them in a semicircle that framed Tamsin the way a frame swallows a picture until there's more frame than picture left. The tea steamed with virtue. Tell me what you think you did, Hetty said cheerfully, like a teacher who needed a child to admit a lie so the lesson would fit. I think I left flour on your porch in February, Tamsin said. For Prue, I think your husband pretended not to see it so he could look bigger for saying he found it. Hetty's smile stiffened along the edges. Around her, the tea on laps trembled as wrists remembered other trembles. We all help each other, she said. We do it in decent order. Your decent order lets a man hold a ledger like a rope, Tamsin replied. My decent order is to cut it when I can. The younger women's eyes wet. The older ones dried inside, because drying made life possible. Enough, Creel said. He had the talent of ending conversations at the place he might have lost them. Owen, give her water, then leave her to reflection. Deputy Marr brought a tin cup. Tamsin took it and drank slow, because fast would change the thin from water to a favor. When the cup was empty, she handed it back with her thanks as if she were handing back a borrowed season. By late afternoon, the granary's shadow had crossed the yard and claimed the crib. When the air cools after heat, a body understands forgiveness with the skin first. Tamsin sat. Boards answered with a creak that made a small catalog of the day's uses. Her head found the wall. She shut her eyes and counted breaths until counting became a gate, and her mind stood on the safer side of it. She woke to boots, many, their rhythm organized by purpose. Sundown bled along the barn roofs. The first star pretended innocence above the blacksmith's flue. Men the committee called watch were changing guard. Decker was among them. He had a candle lantern and a grin he thought light made handsomer. Cooling off yet? He asked. If I were milk, I'd be safe, she said. He held the lantern close to the slats so shadow laid bars on her cheekbones. You count those breaths and pray, girl, he said softly. Tomorrow we shear you. Maybe a week in the stocks. For penance. You'll get plenty of time to think about what kind of woman you want to be with that pretty hair gone. She looked at him, really looked, until he had to make himself not blink. The kind who doesn't need hair to keep the sun off, she murmured, or a man to keep her fed. Then, before he could find a retort, she shifted her gaze beyond him and let a small, private smile move the corner of her mouth. Men hate. Being left out of a joke, Decker turned to see what she saw. He found Gideon Pike sitting on a hitching stone, lantern light carving his profile into a warning. Decker's grin thinned. He tipped the lantern forward so light made a path to Pike's. Boots. You keeping watch with us? He asked, managing sneer and invitation at once. Passer-by, Gideon said, not moving. I aim to be one again in the morning. You aim to be a lot of things, Decker said. I hear used to aim at. Men, Gideon didn't take the bait. I aim my mornings first, he said, and glanced up at the pricked-apart sky. Always been partial to the part of day that ain't decided yet, Decker snorted. You keep your poetry, Pike. We'll keep our town. He tapped the padlock with the butt of his lantern and went to relieve one of the watch. Gideon remained. The smell of his pipe came unlit and honest on the air stem between teeth, no smoke. A man could comfort himself with the habit and spare the tobacco if he wanted only the ritual. Tamsin listened to the tiny clicks of the stem against his teeth. They made a code that wasn't hers yet. Codes were just truths in the wrong language. She'd learn. Night gathered. In the settling, the mice in the crib's floor forgot to be careful. One skittered over Tamsin's boot. She did not flinch. She thought of her mother again, not the winter, not the grave that would tear the gate from its hinge, but the summer 2 years before, when the woman had laid a lark's nest back into the hedge with both hands, as if returning a crown to a king. Everything worth keeping, her mother had said, fights to stay kept. When will you leave? Tamsin asked into the dark without moving her lips. When the wind minds its business, Gideon said. Won't be tonight. No. A pause. Won't be quiet either. There was comfort in his certainty, the kind the body hides under and denies later. She let it warm her long enough to store some in the lining of her will. Drunk men came near midnight, beer sour and brave. They rattled the door and said things that made even each other uncomfortable in the aftermath. The watch shooed them away. One of the drunk men tripped and said sorry to the sky. Another wept meanly about his sister leaving him for a brakeman. The prairie carried their noises off toward the slough. Gideon hummed something that had lost its words between Missouri and here. He took the pipe from his teeth and tongued the notch in the stem where old worry had carved a habit. Tamsin drifted along the edge of sleep and found herself weaving nettle cordage in her mind, pulling green sting into useful rope. At first light, the committee came back with their hunger freshened by beds. The women brought a pair of shears bright as a surgeon's daydream. Hetty Vale held them like they were a hymn. Pastor Creel carried a Bible already open to a ribbon. That had cut the same page too often. Deputy Marr looked as if he'd slept with the key under his tongue. Birds tried morning notes from the cottonwood. Gideon Pike still leaned his back to the post. hat tilted just enough to suggest he hadn't slept, but didn't mind. "Let's have it done," Creel said, brisker now that the air did not hurt his lungs. "Salvation shouldn't dawdle." "Owen." Mar unlocked the padlock, and the click ran around the yard like a prank. He slid the bolt. The door stuck to its frame, wood swollen with night. He put a shoulder to it and shoved. It came free with a groan. He reached for Tamsin's elbow dot. She did not offer it. She stepped out herself, breath hitching because the light's first strike after a dark is always a blow. She felt the eyes find her as if they were bees buzzing a pattern. She squared her shoulders over the place her fear was folded into a small, useful square. Hetty lifted the shears. "We will begin," she said, with humility. "Start with his," May O'Rourke muttered. Just loud enough for the person she wanted to hear to pretend not to. Creel frowned. "May, let the men settle men. And women settle women?" May's mouth tilted. "Seems we settle the same. Men either way." "Enough," Creel said again, that exact weight he preferred. He put a hand out. "Miss Calder, kneel." Tamsin's gaze went from his hand to the shears, and then to the faces that mattered. Prue Vale's pinched mouth. Arlen Finch's fiddler fingers twitching against his thigh. May O'Rourke's chin set like an anvil. Decker Voss's smile sharpening. "Not today," Tamsin said, very gently. "Not for you." Creel's cheeks blotched. He was not practiced at being refused by those whose deference kept him tall. "Then we must urge you," he said, and lifted his hand a fraction higher. Tamsin's palm came up in the space between his hand and her hair. "Don't," she said, "or you'll learn something about me I don't want to teach." The yard inhaled. Owen Marr moved first, because men like Owen are always eager to be the movement that obeys power. He caught Tamsin's wrist. She twisted not. Away, but through so his grip closed on nothing. He stumbled. There was a laugh from the far fence because someone had not meant to, but couldn't help it. Decker used the stumble. He stepped in and snatched a hank of hair, triumphant at the pain he made with nothing more than a hand. The shears flashed. Tamsin did not cry out. She grunted as if handing something heavy to someone who wouldn't carry their share. The sound made Gideon Pike stand. "What are you exactly?" he asked Creel, voice low, but no one mistook where it would end if it had to climb. "Steward," Creel said. His confidence returned to him with a title like a coat put back on. "Of souls. And order. Order don't need you to hurt it to prove it's real," Gideon said. He walked closer. Dust made small ghosts around his boots. He stopped beside May O'Rourke, who kept her eyes forward, but shifted the smallest weight of her shoulder toward him, the way a bench shifts to welcome the next tool set down. "This is none of your business, Pike," Decker said, and shook. The hair he held as proof he could hold something. Tamsin forced her feet to be stone. Stone breaks shears, she told herself. She kept her eyes on a knot in the granary door and imagined teasing it free with the point of a nail until the wood surrendered its secret circle. Gideon looked at the hand Decker had in Tamsin's hair. "You want to take your hand off that," he said conversationally. "Or what?" Decker asked. Men whose courage comes from an audience always ask or what as if choosing a dessert. Gideon slid the rifle off his shoulder. Not quick. Not slow. Just the speed of a thing that had a place to be and had arrived. He set the butt on the ground and leaned it against his thigh. His hands were open now. "Or I'll make you," he said, and sounded like he meant make the way a river makes a canyon, patiently, with all the years required. Owen Marr put a hand to his revolver because revolvers are the only argument some men know. Gideon turned his head just enough that Owen could see what would happen next if he drew. The distance. The angle. The time math does when the right man does it fast. Owen's hand froze on polished wood. He did not take it away. He left it there like a child leaves jam on a sill he'd promised he wouldn't touch. Creel gestured with the Bible, as if offering a shield the Lord might be insulted to see misused. "You threaten officers of order," he said. "I could say the word and have you bound too." "You could say any word," Gideon replied. "You've said plenty." "Seems to. Me none of them built anything that didn't first break something else." May O'Rourke snorted quiet admiration through her nose and spat steel dust into her palm. Hetty Vale's knuckles whitened on the scissor rings. Prue bit her lip hard enough to pinch it white. "Let go, Decker," Tamsin said. She looked now at his face, saw the boy's bone under the man's stubble, saw the calculation there, the ledger line marking what he could get, the column listing the cost. She put her voice in the space where he counted. "You want to own the story where you sheared a woman who broke your nose?" she asked. "You want wives to repeat it? You want daughters to hear it in their first week bleeding?" His grip loosened a finger's width. "Take your hand away," Gideon said again. Decker obeyed because sometimes a man doesn't believe his own hand belongs to him until the right sentence claims it. He threw the hank of hair into dust to prove he'd been generous. Creel huffed. "Enough performance," he said. "We are not staging a drama for the wayward." He lifted the Bible higher. "Kneel, Miss Calder," and Gideon's rifle moved, not up, not toward anyone. It swung sideways and hammered the padlock where it hung useless at the open door. Then the hasp, then the lower corner joint where time had played carpenter and left a soft spot you couldn't see unless you'd known wood long enough to feel fatigue with your fingers. The blows sounded like iron naming things. The crib shuddered. "What are you doing?" Creel demanded, outrage chasing confusion across his face. "What, stop?" Gideon swung again. The buttstock struck iron, then wood, then iron. The hasp screws squealed. The joint split an inch. Dust coughed out of the seam. Decker lunged. Gideon's left hand was there already, the heel of it in Decker's chest, not hard, just accurate. Decker stumbled and found Owen's boot and sat with an oof that made two of the children giggle before their mothers taught their faces silence. Tamsin's heart had begun to pound hard, enough to measure on her tongue. She stepped backward, back into the crib, understanding in a click what Gideon meant to do and how to help. Her shoulder met the weakened corner. Gideon's eyes cut to hers in question. She nodded, a length no longer than a breath. He nodded back, a promise. "What's wrong with you?" Creel demanded. His voice edged toward panic. "You'll pay for property damage." "A man can't pay debt he doesn't owe," Gideon said, and brought the rifle down again. "Stop him." Hetty said sharply, because anything she could not catalog made her throat itch. Owen Marr stood. His hand had found his revolver again. He had almost convinced himself the draw would go right when May O'Rourke stepped into his space and looked at him as if he were a nail she hadn't yet decided to pull or pound. He hesitated. Habit remembered the time May had caught his wrist with 2 fingers and made the revolver appear on her forge as if she'd conjured it. He let his hand fall. Another blow, a scream of metal. The bottom board, rotten inside where the year's damp had hidden, split along grain like a secret relieved to be told. A gap opened the width of 2 fingers, then more. Gideon rammed the butt once, twice. Tamsin drove her shoulder into the inside seam. The board gave with the distinct sound of something choosing to stop being what it had been. "Enough," Creel sawed, but his voice had lost the organ chord. Hetty's scissors trembled. Decker scrambled to his feet and pointed at Tamsin, as if pointing could reverse time. "Don't," Gideon said for the last time, and his tone convinced even the wind to take a breath and wait. He raised the rifle over his head. For a suspended instant, sunlight burnished the walnut stock and brought the white arcs of old mix up out of the grain like winter rings. Gideon's shadow fell long across the yard and slid into the crib through a dozen narrow cracks. Tamsin braced, muscles trembling, breath in her throat like a bird. The rifle came down. Boards shrieked and flew. The corner split. Light rushed her like water. She closed her eyes against the brightness, and stepped forward into whatever came next as the town gasped. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. And did not stop. She moved with the light like a fish cut free of net, eyes watering, knees remembering honesty better than balance. Dust leapt around her ankles. The air outside the crib felt like a second skin she had mislaid and now found. Again, warm where fear had cooled her, cool where rage had burned. Hands reached without permission and then remembered themselves. Hetty Vale took one step forward with the scissors and one step back with her certainty. Pastor Creel's lips shaped a reprimand and couldn't recall the rest of it. Deputy Owen Marr, who had practiced his swagger in mirrors, stumbled on the fact of an open door he hadn't chosen to open. Gideon Pike lowered the rifle butt from the burst corner and stood easy, as if he had brushed a fly from a horse's flank and found the horse gentler for it. He did not raise the rifle at anyone. He did not need to. The way it rested against his thigh said enough. Here is a tool that knows the difference between wood and man and won't confuse them, unless asked very rudely. Tamsin blinked through the brightness until shapes picked themselves up out of the glare. The crib's ribs were now a broken mouth, jagged and ashamed. She tasted iron where a splinter had kissed her palm and did not lick the blood. Blood licked itself if you let it. Back inside, Creel found at last, jabbing a finger at the shattered door as a child jabs at a toy that has ceased to entertain. The committee has not concluded its. Your committee concluded the day it forgot what a woman's no sounds like, Tamsin said. Her voice surprised her with how steady it was. She felt it all the way down in the solace of her feet, where courage has its roots when it isn't borrowed. You want me quiet, you start by quieting the man who put his hand where his vow said. It wouldn't, murmur rippled. Not loud, the kind people practice when they mean to listen, but might need witnesses later to say they hadn't. Decker. Voss's grin put itself back on like a man pulls up a collar, stiff and not quite fitting. The memory of his hand in her hair still heated her scalp in a circle where skin felt newly aware. Lies, Decker said. Slander spreads quick in hot weather. He lifted the sheared lock from the dirt and tossed it, as if discarding the evidence of his smallness could scare it into forgetting. May O'Rourke's hammer-calloused fingers flexed once. Heat don't make lies, she said to no one particular and everyone in reach. Men do. Order, Creel snapped, feeling authority return like breath after a cough. He held his Bible upright, the ribbon sagely marking a page that had sentenced plenty of women and none of the right men. Miss Calder, kneel. We will have a pledge, a token of repentance. Hair grows back. Tamsin drew herself up so the sunlight found her cheekbones and laid stripes across her throat from the slats that still stood. She fixed her eyes on the tea kettle Prue Vale held, because a girl concentrating on not spilling is a girl holding the world together by its handle. You want a token? She said softly. You can have one I choose. She reached for the knife she wore at her hip, the one she'd used to cut twine and apples, and, once, a man's expectation caught up a small fist of her own hair and sliced a clean lock free near the ear, where no one would see it unless they had earned looking. She laid the lock in Creel's outstretched palm as you lay coin for a debt you acknowledge and not a penny more. There, she said. That's my pledge, to keep what's mine and cut what binds. A child clapped before her mother's hand made the air around the clap firm again. Decker opened his mouth to shape a word that would sound brave and taste like tin. Nothing came out. Words, like bullets, have a way of refusing to serve cowards when courage walks into the room on its own feet. Gideon's eyes met. Tamsin's. He didn't nod. Nodding claimed credit. But something in the line of his shoulders answered her choice. And stood with it. Town meeting, Owen Marr blurted into the pause, as if he had invented the idea and ought to receive its ribbon. Temperance Hall, sundown. We'll hear it all. Let folks speak. He looked to Creel for praise and found only a thin-lipped approval that said later, maybe. Creel gathered himself. Yes, he said, leaning into the idea because he could make a meeting into a pulpit if you left him alone with it. The committee will convene an open hearing. We will discover truth in decent order. Decent order, May echoed dry as salt. Bring your receipts for it. The crowd loosened. Meetings were safer than moments. People prefer to schedule their courage. Prue Vale hovered at the edge of Tamsin's vision, eyes a broken saucer. Tamsin turned fully toward her and let her face be as gentle as she could afford. You owe me no speech, she murmured. We both know what silence can do. And what it costs, Prue swallowed. Her voice arrived small and precise. He keeps a second book, she said, and flinched as if the words themselves had a boot attached. Hetty Vale's hand flew out, not striking, just expecting obedience. Prue flinched again, but the words were out now. Not the store ledger. The one behind it, with pledges. Hetty's face tried to arrange itself into a mask that would let her look later in a mirror without cracking. Prue, she hissed. Tamsin opened her palms where Prue could hide a moment if she needed to. That's enough for now, Tamsin said to the girl gently, and to the town sharp. Sundown then. Open hearing. Bring your ledgers and the truth between the lines. She turned, not waiting for permission to leave, because asking would feed a part of them she wasn't in the business of feeding. Her knees wanted to shake. She let them do it once, small, in the shadow where no one could see, and then told them they could shake later when the sky was too dark to judge their angles. Gideon fell into step beside her without pretending to escort. He matched her pace like a man keeps time with a friend's breath. May O'Rourke joined on her other side, hand light on Tamsin's elbow in a way that offered ballast without stealing steerag. No one barred their path, not for lack of trying, for lack of knowing how to begin again after someone else had started. The new way already, they crossed the yard. The broken crib stood gaping behind them like an old law wondering where its teeth had gone. May's forge breathed furnace heat that meant work, not punishment. The mouth of it glowed like a promise kept. May pushed the door with her hip and ushered them in as if the shop were a chapel and they were the kind of people who came when bells rang, because bell metal was kin to anvil metal and both demanded steadiness. Sit, May said to Tamsin, and pointed at a stool whose legs had burn marks like tree rings. Hands. Tamsin offered them. May turned them palm up, palm down, and made a cluck so soft it earned its right to exist. She fetched a basin and a cloth and set about cleaning the splinter-kissed skin with a tenderness most people reserve for babies and old tools. Hurts? Gideon asked, voice angled low so it wouldn't knock anything off a shelf. Enough to know I'm alive, Tamsin said. Not enough to make me wish otherwise. She watched May's hands the way a student watches a teacher who insists she isn't one. The cloth stung. She did not move away from the sting. Pain with a purpose is a language worth learning. Gideon stayed near the door, shoulders finding the shape of the jam without leaning on it. He took off his hat and set it upside down on a peg as if to catch luck. He looked wrong without the hat for a heartbeat, then right again. Like a field looked wrong without grass, and then you saw the seed waiting. I'm obliged, Tamsin said without looking up from the basin. She kept the thanks small so it could pass through the room without waking pride. For the woodwork. Gideon's mouth ticked at one corner. That crib was tired of its job, he said. I heard it sigh when it gave up. May snorted. Boards don't sigh. Men do when they think boards are listening. But her eyes were a shade warmer when she said it. Tamsin dried her palms on her skirt and felt grit turn mud under the damp, then vanish as the fabric drank. We need proof, she said. Words travel. Truth gets lost if you don't tie it to something heavy. Ledger, May said, as if tasting iron. Prue's mouth will be a mark, but paper's a hammer. Vos keeps a tidy tyranny. Men who like tidy make mistakes you can measure. Gideon nodded once. Back room of the store. Desk to the left. Drawer that sticks when it's humid. False bottom. Tamsin turned her head. You sure? She said. It wasn't a question so much as a way of knowing whether this man guessed or knew. Sure enough to risk being wrong, he said. I worked freight winter before last. Helped Decker move in a desk he cussed for being heavier than it looked. He cusses like a man who hides rocks in his bread and wonders why his teeth go. Tonight, Tamsin said. She stood. Her legs took the order. Before the meeting. Before he has time to make kindling out of ink. May stepped into Tamsin's space and fastened a leather apron around her waist. Wear this so splinters think twice, she said. She bent to rummage and came up with a stubby hammer whose head had served in smaller wars. In case a lock gets philosophical. Gideon's gaze tracked the apron's tie. Not where it lay, but how. Not the waist, but the weight. He looked away quick, and Tamsin felt the odd relief of a man teaching his eyes to do what his hands already knew. Respect isn't a speech. It's where you let your focus rest. We go together, Gideon said. Tamsin shook her head. You go when I need you, not before. He looks for you. He watches me. Let's make him watch the wrong thing, May grinned. Lord, I like you, she said, and it landed like a benediction that knew how to swear. The store smelled of molasses, kerosene, and the fat of cheese wrapped in cloth that had handled a dozen other tasks before this honor. Late afternoon threw a stripe of light across the counter, the kind of stripe that makes dust confess. Tamsin eased the back door with a thumb, lift, and a push. The hinges complained because no one had taught them discretion, but the complaint was small enough to pass for settling wood. She stepped into Sack's shadows. Flour towered, beans bulged, nails waited in small kegs with the patient menace of 1,000 quiet points. The desk sat where Gideon had said, a little proud of itself. Third drawer down to the left, glancing out, as if it knew the gossip and would tell it for a price. Tamsin slid the hammer into her apron's pocket. She took a hairpin from the twist she'd made with fingers that remembered the lock of hair Decker had taken and the lock she had given. She bent the pin into a question and offered it to the drawer's lock. The drawer answered stubbornly. Pins are questions locks often understand. It clicked open with the reluctant sigh of a man agreeing to lose. Paper stacked itself. Plain in the top, the green ink ledger anyone could request, and few were allowed to inspect as long as they asked politely. She leafed it enough to know it. Bore witness to beans and brooms and salt and lies that had learned to look like numbers. Then she slid her fingers along the bottom of the drawer. The wood felt even, old varnish gone soft with years. At the back edge, she found a lip that didn't belong. Come on, she whispered to wood. Give up what you're hiding. She worked the hairpin under the lip and levered. The false bottom lifted the width of a fingernail, then stuck. The hammer's stub nose persuaded where the pin's courtesy had failed. The plank popped with a sound like a cork that had given up pretending to fit the bottle it was married to. The second ledger lay beneath, wrapped in brown paper tied with twine. And sign. Her stomach turned cold. Paper lies colder than spoken ones. It lasts longer. She untied the twine and opened the cover. Names looked back. Some she knew like the taste of well water. Some she had never heard uttered but had seen on doorframes. Stitched on aprons, columns told their little truths. Grain at twice the stamp price. Interest stacked like cordwood. Pledges marked with a letter P and a number and a date that always seemed to arrive on the same day of the week, the day Decker's wife visited her sister in Canton. Next to some P's were initials HV twice. Tamsin sat back with a small sound her throat made to keep from spilling anything else. She flipped to the back. Tucked there, receipts. Creel's tidy signature down one side of a page in a hand that did not know shake. Donation, Temperance Fund. Opposite column read, in Decker's smaller hand, "Discounts extended." Funny how virtue and economy keep books in the same ink. A floorboard sighed. That wasn't under her boot. Sin froze. The back door's shadow altered. She slid the ledger into the leather apron, flat against her belly, and retied the string across the fake bottom with hands that did not belong to her for a second, and then did again. Only stronger. Thought. "You might come for a souvenir," Decker said from the doorway. His voice didn't need lantern light to smirk. "Girls like keepsakes. A ribbon, a lock of hair, a book." He stepped in. Owen Marr lingered behind him in the alley, his hat lone shouldering. The son, another man, edged past Owen, a hired set of fists named Pike had seen once at a railhead poker table. A man who wore his knuckles like rings, Clay Boyd. "A woman's hand just can't leave off meddling," Decker said, coming around the counter with a pilgrim's patience, as if he approached a relic. "I'll take that." Tamsin put her hand flat on the desktop and felt the grain under her palm like a map home. She smiled with no teeth. "You'll take your time learning," she said. "But I suppose you always do." Clay Boyd chuckled, that low barroom roll that makes women reach for the hatpin they hid in their bun. "She's got lip," he told Owen. "When I should touch her and you won't have knuckles to wear." May O'Rourke said from the door. She had come the long way over fences a woman learns when back doors matter. She stood with an iron bar across her shoulders, as if it were a shawl and she were cold only on the outside. Behind her, Gideon Pike's shadow squared itself into the room before his body did. The sight of it put quiet into places Tamsin hadn't known were loud. Owen's hand went to his holster. Gideon didn't look at the hand. He looked at the floorboard in front of Owen's boot and said, "You pick that up, you'll shoot it." "What?" Owen blinked. "Your foot," Gideon said kindly. "You'll shoot your foot." Owen's hand decided to find his belt instead. Decker glanced from May to Gideon to Tamsin. His brain did a little tally dance it had done all his life and had never once seen fail him. He opened his mouth to say a thing about the law and found the room, didn't believe he'd met it. Cyan moved first. She slid sideways along the counter and put 3 feet of flour sacks between herself and Clay Boyd's hands. "Sundown," she said, and the word rang like a pot struck with the back of a spoon. "Temperance Hall. Bring your faces and your nerve. I'll bring the pages." She turned her chin toward Gideon without taking her eyes off Decker. "We're done here." Clay lunged because some men can't let a woman leave a room without proof. She left through a door they chose. May's iron bar lifted and the air complained. Clay reconsidered his religion for the half-second it took Gideon to put one palm on his shoulder and turn his momentum into a stumble that took him nowhere useful. "Let's not ruin the store," Gideon murmured as if discussing a shelf he meant to build. "Folks need sugar." Tamsin left by the back, apron heavy at the belly, heart heavier in the right ways. The alley air grabbed her, and she grabbed back. She did not run. Running tells a story the wrong ears get to write. She walked like a woman who had pies in the May oven. She walked like a woman who had waited all winter for a thaw and heard the creak at last say, "I'm moving." Temperance Hall had been built to teach women not to drink and men not to feel. On nights like this, it did neither job well. The place thrummed with the pitch that rises when a town discovers it is a choir and must decide what song to sing. Benches held men whose boots said they'd work today and men whose boots said they'd practice standing still. Women filled the back rows and leaked into the sides, their shawls a weather you could read if you knew the colors. Children crouched under the benches with the quick grab joy of young foxes. Creel stood at the front. Beneath a motto someone had painted in letters too pious for their wood. "Decency is destiny." He smoothed his hair as if truth lay under it and could be coaxed out by parting straight. Decker Voss took a place to Creel's right. The bruise Tamsin had put under his eye sprouted yellow at the edges now, like a field remembering the sun after hail. Tamsin walked up the aisle with her gorge quiet and her steps not counting. Gideon stopped at the side door and stood where a man who meant to leave could and a man who meant to stay would. May claimed the end of a bench near the front and put her iron bar under it in a move that said, "I know where I put my tools and I can reach them quick." "Neighbors," Creel began, and made the word sound like a garment he wore only on Sundays. "We gather to make light where confusion breeds in dark. We gather to spare a soul and save a town." His eyes touched Tamsin as if she were a stain on his prayer book. "Miss Calder has been accused. I'm done with being only accused," Tamsin said, her voice carrying clean into the high corners. "Tonight I accuse back." She eased the apron tie and slid the ledger out. It looked like any book. "That's how evil hides best in covers no one thinks to open." Decker laughed. The sound rattled and stopped. "That your diary?" "It's the story of your hands," she said. Page 1, pricing flour dear when the river ran full and wheat came down easy. Page 2, interest like a rope. Page 3 through 20. Pledges from women you don't sell to their faces. She held the book without waving it. Waving cheapens proof. "And here," she added, thumbing to the back, "the part where the pastor's donations buy you forgiveness on layaway. Silence is not all the same." This one had weight. It pressed the boards and hoisted the truth. May grunted like a bellows set to low. Arlen Finch, whose fiddle had learned all the good funerals by heart, stopped breathing for the length of a phrase. "Lies," Creel said. "Manufactured, forged, anyone can read," Tamsin said, and took 3 steps forward and laid the ledger on the table between them. "Pick a page from the back and match it to a page in your daybook. I'll wait." Hetty Vale rose too fast and sat too slow, the body confessing what the mouth refused. Prue's hands clenched in her lap around nothing and everything at the same time. Decker reached. Gideon's hand met his wrist midway and took it politely away as you take a leaf out of soup you mean to eat. "Let the pastor read," Gideon suggested. "He's got letters." Creel fixed him with indignation that had been enough for a lifetime until tonight. Then he turned a page because the room had decided that reading would happen, and a man who refuses to read while holding a Bible looks worse than a man who stumbles over a word. His mouth moved. He swallowed. He turned another page. His thumb smudged a date that didn't want his print on it. "This is disgraceful," he said at last, and meant the fact of being seen more than the facts themselves. "Name the disgrace right, May." Sighed, kindly in the way a hammer never misses. "Start with Decker. Work your way toward the mirror." Decker surged for the book as if taking it back could make time unlearn. Gideon caught him again, not rough, just final. Clayboyd shifted near the aisle, and May's iron bar made the small ringing sound iron makes even when it's still. That was enough to change several men's minds. Tamsin's breath came steady. It came through her nose and down the old path courage takes when it doesn't want attention. "Prue," she said, not turning toward the girl because naming is safer when you don't pin a person to it. "You don't need to speak. If you do, say only what's yours." Prue stood. Her knees touched the bench and stayed there, so she bent her body at the waist as if both standing and kneeling at once might satisfy decency and destiny together. "He said my husband's debt could be eased," she said in that careful voice of the small-mouthed brave. "He said the fund would help. He said the ledger didn't need all the lines it had." Hetty made her sound. "It had a mother in it. And a bully and a prayer. Sit," she whispered. "Please." "I am," Prue breathed, and kept her spine where she had put it. A murmur rose different from the first. This one had women in it in a way men recognized from kitchens they did not enter, the sound of weather deciding to be storm. Decker flailed for law again. "You can't just," he began. "You can," May said. "Watch." She stood, not needing height to get taller. "This isn't a church hearing. This is a town deciding whether it knows what it is when no one's watching. You take their hair and call it mercy. You take their bodies and call it settlement. You take their coin and call it order. I call it theft with hymns. Arlen Finch clapped once, sharp as a whip crack, and then stopped like a man who'd found himself at the edge of a canyon and liked the view more than safety. Creel spread his hands. Decency, he began. The lamp behind him, the one set too high and too near the motto, tilted. Maybe a draft leaned on it. Maybe a sleeve. Maybe fate is a child who likes to tip things. The lamp kissed the calico banner. Flame found cloth. Like a dog finds home. Fire, Prue said. Small and exact as before. Heat moved fast in a hall that had liked being dry. The banner flared, the motto's E curled black into its neighbor. Smoke climbed the rafters like a man who knows he is. Safe because he wore the house into being. Stay calm, Creel said, and the orders scattered in the first cough. Children screamed because children practice all sounds often. A woman's shawl flicked to beat a flame and made 3. Decker seized the ledger. Gideon's hand closed around his wrist for the 3rd time, and this time something in Decker's face understood that wrists remember who held them. Doors, Gideon said, and the word cut the panic into jobs. Back latches high, front bar sticks left, windows lift. Don't smash until the hinges give up politeness. May shouldered the bar and went to the rear. 2 men tried to help and then remembered how to help when help speaks iron. Tamsin swept the ledger up before Decker could fumble it into the fire and turned to find the children. Smoke taught her eyes to water and her lungs to think. She bent, hands finding small shoulders. Crawl, she said, and made the word a path. Hold. The bench rail, don't let go. Prue coughed and fell to her knees and began counting in a whisper that may have been prayer and may have been numbers. 1, 2, 3. Her hands found little hands and threaded them like beads. The back latch refused until May cursed it in the name of every nail that ever stayed true. It gave with a scream. Air rushed. Flame bulged greedily toward the door like a guest who thinks the food is free, and the table owes it memory. Creel fanned the smoke with his palm and looked offended it did not part. He grabbed at the ledger, the reflex of men who think a book is a crown, and his fingers grazed Tamsin's wrist. She twisted and he caught nothing but heat. Decker darted toward the side aisle. Head ducked, cowardice clever enough to find the new rules quickly. Clayboyd shoved a woman aside and earned a blow that restored his memory from a husband, whose hands shook after he struck him because some men aren't practiced and hope they never will be again. Gideon's voice kept turning fear into instructions. Tie the curtain to the window bar good. You soak your shawl. Water now matters more than pretty. He moved through smoke with a carpenter's sense of lines, finding straight in a world turning crooked. He reached the front where the main bar held the door like a stubborn idea and put his shoulder into the leftward stick, then down, then left again. The beam lifted. Men surged. He held them back a heartbeat so the crush wouldn't kill the small. Who'd reached the door first? Take them in order, he said, and they did because someone told them the order they wanted was available again. Flame licked the stage curtains to Tamsin's right and found the knot that kept them gathered. The knot lit and fell burning. Fire ran the rope and found the eaves above the front bench. The wood made a sound like a groan choke to keep from waking a child. Up! Someone shouted in the wrong direction. The balcony stairs on the side were already painting themselves with fire. Down! Tamsin countered. Stay low, a child coughed and curled. Tamsin scooped her and thrust her toward May, who had carved a triangle of safety with her bar and her cussedness. Prue coughed again, hard enough to fold. Tamsin grabbed her elbow and hauled her toward the front, ledger pinned to her ribs, air. A blade that had chosen the inside of her throat to sharpen on Dot at the front. They reached a logjam of bodies with the shape of escape in front of them and the shape of death behind. Panic does sums badly. Tamsin shoved the ledger at Prue. "Hold this," she said. "Hold it like breath." Prue clutched it like pain that matters. A cry broke from the balcony rail. "My boy!" A woman's voice broke on the third word. Tamsin tilted her head. A small figure stood up there. Toward the back, a bench-shy boy who had climbed the steps before the flame found them and now watched both roots down go red. "Stay," Gideon barked, seeing Tamsin's weight shift. He coughed and pushed too. More bodies through the door. "Go, go," turned back, eyes finding Tamsin's in the smoke. "Don't." She moved anyway. Courage that counts learns the voices it declines. She ran along the edge of the aisle where the boards had not yet chosen to be coals and reached the base of the staircase. Heat hit her face. Hair curled against her scalp where the cut ends remembered the scissors. She pulled her apron up too. Shielded her mouth and took 3 steps. The 4th burned. The 5th taught her how to balance pain in one foot while the other foot learned from it. The 6th took her high enough to see the boy's eyes properly wide and dark and listless in the particular way fear goes when it gets too much to manage. "Hey," she said, voice a whisper set hard. "You like games?" He blinked. His name came from the shape of his face in her memory. Walt Jenkins's youngest, she thought. Little Eli. Aloud, "Listen, Eli. We are going to play the hold-on game. Can you do that? Can you hold on to me like you hate falling?" He looked. At her hands, red, scraped, busy, and then at the fire behind her and made a decision many men never learned to make. He nodded once. She reached him. The rail burned where her palm brushed it. She didn't keep her palm there. She put Eli on her left hip and turned, making herself a wall where the worst of the flame climbed. The way down was a pocket of air. Between 2 moving red mouths. Gideon was below now. 1 foot on the 2nd step, his hat gone, hair soaked with sweat and water he'd poured down his collar like scents. "There," he said, pointing not at the step she wanted, but a plank to its right, where the grain had run long enough to be stronger. "That, then left. Trust your weight." She did, because his eyes had not lied all day. The plank held. Her calf screamed. Her skirt hem smoldered, and she slapped it with the back of her hand. The slap left skin. She could inventory it later. The next step had broken inward. She swung over it and landed on Gideon's forearm, even as his other hand braced the boy against his chest. For a moment, the 3 of them shared an axis. Then the axis moved to the door and pushed them toward it. They spilled into street air that tasted like old pennies and rain. People seized the child, and then his mother, and then their own breaths. Tamsin bent double and found the ground with both hands and did not let her stomach empty, because it had nothing to give and the effort would cost more than it bought. Behind them, a crack ran through the hall's rafter as if someone had drawn a chalk line and a saw had found it. May shouted a warning. The front edge of the balcony let go with a sound like a word changed at the last minute. "Back!" Gideon roared, gathering people with the force of a single syllable. Tamsin straightened, eyes searching without asking permission. Prue stood near the door, still clutching the ledger, face ash-streaked, the book held to her sternum like a prayer pinned to the body. Creel stumbled out, hair singed, Bible held high as if flame respects leather. Decker appeared in the doorway and stopped, calculating anew, eyes cutting the crowd for the route that would preserve him and throw the rest away. Smoke thickened, a living thing uncertain which way to throw itself. In the hall's guts, something heavy popped beam or guilt or both. And then, over the hiss of water and the cough of people and the crack groan of wood doing math with heat, came the sound that drew Tamsin's head up as if a string had been tied to her chin and tugged by God. A child crying again from above, thin as a thread. Not Eli, another. She knew the cry in the particular way women do. Not for any mothering she had done, but for the care she had learned watching other women's hands. Newer lungs. Smaller ribs. She looked up. There a second little one, farther. Back along the balcony, hidden until smoke pulled aside like a curtain that wanted to see the stage and had the worst timing. The stairs were gone now. The rail licked flame as if tasting and deciding to swallow. Gideon saw her see. He shook his head once, sharp enough to hurt the air. "No," he said. "You did your one." "I'm not counting," she said, and ran. The front beam screamed. The balcony shuddered. People yelled words that turned to heat before they reached ears. Tamsin leapt the first 3 steps because there were no steps. Fire took her skirt again, and she didn't slap it this time. She let it run until she found the child, and then smothered both with her apron in a movement so quick the cloth barely had time to decide whether to be brave. Below, Gideon moved to where she would choose to fall if she fell. May dragged a bench into position to make a bridge if something could still be bridged. Prue clutched the ledger with her body in the shadow of the doorway, as if being small made her safer when it made her a target. Decker Voss turned away from the hall and toward the alley, ledger forgotten because a man with no accounting in him leaves numbers when they stop serving. Tamsin lifted the child baby, really heavy with sleep terror and the weight of a body, deciding stay or go. The beam above her made its decision. It cracked. It swung. It let go and slammed through the air like a door. The beam came down with the authority of old timber that had never been told no. Tamsin didn't try to meet it. She learned young you don't outstare gravity. She turned her shoulder so the blow would have to slide where it wanted to stop, tucked the baby into the wedge of her clavicle and jaw, and stepped into the space Gideon had just made with his voice. For one hitch of time the beam and her shared a length of breath. The beam struck the rail where her spine had been and shattered it into a bouquet of splinters. The child didn't cry until the sound of the break made crying feel like permission. Tamsin cradled the sob like a spark, small and violent, and hissed a thank you under it that wasn't to anyone in the room. "Here," Gideon said, and his body caught the piece of her weight that had nowhere to go, then set it gently where it could decide again. His forearm under her elbow had the feel of a length of good oak, honest, with a memory of weather. "Step," he said, and she did because the floor had chosen to hold only the weight of people who trusted it. Behind them, fire found a knot in the beam that had cracked and made its own little son, angry to be small. The balcony sighed, not the human kind, but the building kind. The noise a house makes when it counts reasons to continue and decides it hasn't enough. Outside, air hit Tamsin's throat like water too clean to drink fast. She crouched, knees giving her back the debt they'd accrued in flame interest. Hands reached for the baby and she eased him into them, feeling the transfer the way a seamstress feels a finished hem settle into cloth, work becoming garment. "Eli." Someone sobbed into the child's hair, and he answered with a bleat that meant both hunger and the end of the worst kind of fear. "Back," Gideon called as another groan pinned all eyes to the hall. The front beam, the one with decency is destiny stitched into the banner above it, bent. The word destiny crumpled into a blackened stutter. The beam let go. The front half of the balcony came with it in a ruin of sparks and hymn book ash. The town took 3 steps backward in one motion and, for the first time all day, found itself moving together. Smoke leaned out the doorway like a man too drunk to stay standing. Clayboyd came staggering through it, hands up around his head as if fire were rain and could be kept at bay by wishing his hat a roof. May's hand shot out, caught the collar of his coat, and hauled him clear as the beam kissed the doorframe and spat coals across the threshold. Prue Vale stumbled next, ledger to her chest, curls singed into commas against her cheeks. Tamsin felt relief run down her like water on a porch roof. She reached and closed her fingers around the book's spine, not to take it but to feel the fact of it against bone. "Here," Prue coughed, trying to hand it off anyway, the way a girl trained to move burdens moves all of them. "You should have it. You keep it for a count of 10, Tamsin said, bending to look her in the eyes so the words didn't get lost half a foot shy. You did the hard part. Let your hands learn it. Prue nodded, sob-sucked air, and held on. Creel emerged at last, seared around the edges like a sermon left too near a stove. His hair had singed into tight curls over his ears. His collar lay wilted, the starch gone out of it like pride. He still clutched his Bible. The leather blistered where heat had been gentler than some men. "Neighbors," he wheezed, trying to herd words. This is the enemy at work." May stepped between him and the crowd. "Aye," she said. "And he's holding a ledger," and learned to smile. She pointed at Decker Voss, who had found himself a patch of clear air, and was using it to breathe in a way that accused others of needing oxygen. Decker flashed his palms as if absolution might descend at the sight of his nails. "You saw her." He pitched his voice to reach. "You saw the harlot rush the fire for show. She brought that book to ruin men. She burned the motto." "The lamp burned the motto," Tamsin said. Her voice had to squeeze through a cough, but it came out straight. "Your fear catches faster." Owen Marr hovered at Decker's elbow, hat gone, hair plastered to his head with sweat that made him look younger than he'd been all morning. His eyes skittered between Gideon and the crowd as if numbers had turned to stones, and he could not count without hurting himself. The square made space for the truth to stand up in. Tamsin felt the shape of the moment the way one feels a needle in a hem without needing to look for it. She stepped forward into it, not because she wanted to, but because the scene would pucker if she didn't. "Keep your seats," she said to the air, and for a wonder the townsfolk found them with their feet. "We called a meeting. We're having it." Only the roof moved. Her throat scraped. Smoke had sanded the edge off her words. She looked to Gideon. He nodded once. "Not permission. Witness, page 23, she said to Creel. "Read." He stared at her, at the ledger, at the faces around him that had stopped being blank and started being mirrors. He didn't reach for the book. He reached for indignation and found his hand went through it. "This is not the time. It's the only time we've got." Tamsin eased the ledger from Prue without tugging, opened to the page, and held it where anyone with letters could see. The columns were neat in Decker's small, careful hand. At the bottom a note, P14, HV, Tuesday. Hetty Vale had stopped smoothing her skirt. Her hands lay still in her lap as if she'd just noticed she owned them. "Not here," she whispered. "Please." Tamsin looked at her and softened her voice without smothering it. "We'll say only what's ours," she said. "No more, no less." She handed the book to May. "Read the numbers, blacksmith." May O'Rourke read the way a bell tolls noon, with exactitude and a little mercy. "Flour at twice the river price," she said. "Kerosene tallied twice. Interest at 8 when stamp says 4. And a pledge, initials HV." She closed the book with the gravity of a lid. "We know what that means." Creel tried to find purchase on a sloped ground. "There are arrangements that shame women sanctify men," May said. "Some of us learned to work iron because men called flour a luxury." The crowd murmured again, but it was no longer politely. It had the tone of a barn raising when the first frame goes up true, and men cheered because they were proud of the timber, and the timber answered proud. Decker's smile lost its professional shine. He turned toward escape like a rat looks for a hole where the cat isn't. Gideon stepped so his body filled the hole without moving his feet more than a thumb width. "Stay," he said, not loud. "You've been wanting an audience." "You've got one." Hetty stood. The space around her tightened and leaned. "I contributed to the Temperance Fund," she said, "for the care of the committee's work." She swallowed. If that money bought discounts. She couldn't say the word. It would burn her mouth worse than smoke. "I did not know." Prue's chin lifted so slightly only Tamsin saw the muscle work. "I told you," she said. "Twice." Hetty's hand went to her throat as if to keep the past from falling out. "I thought you were asking me to pick between decency and despair," she whispered. "I chose the word that sounded nicer." You chose not to see, Tamsin said gently, and did not make it a whip. Now you've seen. She pointed at the ledger. We take this to a judge, not a pastor. A court that knows how to weigh paper and men. Morgan, someone said from the side, the banker, hat in his hands, thumb polishing the brim. Circuit judge won't be through for 3 weeks. County seats 2 days by wagon. And Voss's accounts. He shrugged shame into his collar. He's got loans on half our houses. Then half your houses will stop being his when this is done, May said. If we live with the fire we know, we die by it. Decker laughed, short and hollow. You all are brave until supper, he said. Then you'll remember I sell flour. Not after tonight, Gideon said. He looked at Owen, Deputy Marr. His voice gave the title back its function. You have a jail with a lock that isn't just for women. Use it. Owen Marr blinked as if the day had snapped him back into his baby name. On what charge? He said, truly bewildered. I mean, I can't fraud, May supplied. Extortion. Lewd conduct under color of debt. Arson if we look hard enough. Arson? Creel sputtered. How dare you? Your lamp, your banner, your motto for kindling, May said. If the shoe doesn't fit your foot, it still fits your idea. Owen's gaze traveled from May to Tamsin to Gideon to the ledger. And at last to Prue. It stuck there, because some men remember kindnesses they never earned. He nodded like a man picking the heavier bucket, because he is tired of spilling water from the light one. Decker Voss, he said, voice steadier than it had any right to be. You'll come along. Decker took a half step as if his boots had something to say for themselves and then stopped because Gideon's shoulder was where that half step wanted to go. Decker started for outlaw and settled on something vaguer. You're nothing. Gideon didn't smile. If so, you're losing to nothing, he said mildly. Owen put his hand on Decker's arm, not hard. Decker sneered, then found it was the sneer of a boy who had not yet learned the squares of a room when the furniture moved. He went, stiff with the hope of later. Clay Boyd slunk after him, discovering he could fit a lot of remorse into a narrow doorway. Creel dabbed at his brow with his handkerchief and glared at the ledger, as if it were a woman who refused to perform gratitude. This conflagration has made us all intemperate, he said. We'll write to the judge for guidance. You'll write and we'll ride, Tamsin said. Paper travels slow when it's penned by men who hope it doesn't arrive. She looked around at faces, Walt Jenkins, soot-hatched, holding Eli and not caring that the boy wet his shirt. Arlen Finch with his fiddle case under his arm like a baby with a handle. Hetty Vale, colorless and breathing, which is a start when confession is new. Tonight we copy the book. Tomorrow 3 copies ride different roads. One to the judge, one to the newspaper in the county seat, and one to my apron if it has to. A hum rose, a scent mixed with fear, but a scent. Gideon's eyes had not left Decker. He was counting the man's rage in small, sensible measures. Now. He turned to Tamsin, just enough. He won't wait for courts, he said. He's going to run for muscle. I know, she said. Then we'd better run for morning. Night laid itself over Brackenridge, gentler than it had any. Right to be after watching what they had done. The air cooled as if the prairie had opened a window. Stars punched their small holes in the dark. Heat leaked out, strange mercy. At May's forge, lamplight turned the walls into a warm cave, safe the way rooms are that remember what they were. Built to hold Dot, they laid the ledger on a clean board stack that smelled of planed pine. May sharpened a pencil with the pocket knife that had not yet had a chance to forget it had cut meat and rope and men's pretensions. Prue sat with her spine straight and her hands steady, copying numbers in a script that would not wobble for anyone's comfort. Tamsin worked beside her, mouth tight with concentration that kept too many thoughts out. She copied the initials she recognized, the ones that weren't Prue's, and wrote their full names gently under each, as if touching. A bruise. Letty Morgan. E.P. Eunice Pritchard. S.R. Sally Raines. Each letter was a person. She let the letters know it. Gideon sat at the end of the bench, eyes on the door more than the page. He copied too, with a working man's neatness, not fast but as reliable as a pump handle in a dry spell. Every so often he lifted his head. Tamsin felt those lifts as a change in the room's tether, not in a way that made her jolt. In a way that let her return to her own breath and find it still there. "Why'd you stop shooting?" She asked into the scratch and hush, and instantly wished the words back, because they sounded like a wife asking why a man came home early. "In life, I mean," she added, which somehow made it worse and better. Gideon's pencil paused. He sharpened it, though it didn't need it, then set the knife down and looked at her without trying to strip or shield anything. "I was good at it," he said. "Being good at killing is an odd thing to be paid for. The coins like to stay in your pocket and make rust." He shrugged one shoulder. "I was tired of sleeping alone and waking with no voices but the ones I'd made stop." A silence like respectful space gathered around his words. May blew pencil dust off a page and didn't make a joke, which was her way of honoring the dead without saying so. Prue's hand did not waver. "My ma used to say," Tamsin heard herself answer, "that some work makes your hands clean even when they're black, and some makes them dirty even when you wash." She flexed her fingers, the places the splinters had found smarting now they had nothing else to do. "Seems you picked the first kind, today." She thought of his rifle butt splintering the crib, his shoulder under her step, his voice at the staircase choosing the plank that would hold. "Today counts for a lot," he inclined his head. The corners of his mouth acknowledged the compliment, the way a good horse acknowledges a pat, with a flick of ear that means "I heard you." "And also we have corners ahead." They copied until the pencil tips were infants and the lamplight wanted to be a cradle. They had 2 bundles of pages by midnight, wrapped in oilcloth and tied Prue's knots tidy and tight. Tamsin's double knotted, because the world comes undone twice as fast as it's made. "I'll take 1 east at first light," May said, thumbing the edge of the oilcloth with a satisfaction that said steel had taught her how to fold even what wasn't metal. "I know a rancher on Willow Creek with a son who runs errands for the paper for beer. He'll run this for pride." Tamsin nodded. "Prue takes the second in the opposite direction," she said. "With Eli's ma, no offense, Walt, because a woman with a baby isn't stopped often, except by fools." "I'll be the fool on that road if a man tries," Gideon said. "To be safe." "And the third?" Prue asked, glancing at the ledger sitting stubborn as an anvil at the table center. Tamsin laid her palm on it. The book's boards were cool now. They didn't heat under the hand to flatter. "Stays where every eye expects it to be until—" "It's not," she said. "On the pastor's table at dawn. While he watches me watch him watch it." Gideon didn't argue because arguing would have been trying to move a stone he respected. He looked at the door again, and the window, and the ceiling joint above the stove that sometimes creaked when wagons rattled past. "What?" Tamsin asked. Her ears had voted to learn his silences. He listened. "Nothing," he said. "Or not yet." It came an hour later, when the lamplight had sunk low enough a flame could sneak jealous without being seen from the street. A scent slid under the door. Kerosene wearing a ragged shirt. May's head snapped up. "No," she said. "Not my shop." She grabbed the wet sack she kept for quenching stray heat and ran to the back. Gideon was at the door. Tamsin at the window before the second breath. She saw it then, a smear of flame along the sill outside, where someone had slopped oil and tossed a match from the alley like a casual insult. She snatched the water jug from the bench and flung. The flame hissed, tried on a new shape, and then died from vanity. "Back wall," May shouted. "They're trying both." Gideon vanished through the door, soundless but for the thud of his boots convincing the ground to hold them. Tamsin seized another jug. Prue grabbed the third without waiting to be told, because the room had finally taught her it wanted to be saved by people besides men. By the time Tamsin reached the rear, Gideon had a man by the coat and the coat by the man, which made the man want not to be in either. Clay Boyd's face arrived in the lamplight like an admission. Another man fled along the fence thin, with a cough that tied a knot in its own end. Go, Gideon grunted, handing Clay to May, who did not mind what she caught if it needed catching. Tamsin dashed to the corner where oil had pooled, threw water, and listened for the sound that means a wooden wall has decided not to breathe fire. It came the sob and then the long combing. May pinned Clay's arm behind him like metal that had been asked whether it wanted to bend. You bring fire near my shop again, she said, voice flat as a cool blade, and I'll teach you a shape your mother won't recognize even in heaven where they fix things. Clay panted. Wasn't me with the match, he wheezed. Just watch. Gideon returned, eyes scanning the dark for the cough. He sent you for distraction, he said. Who's lighting what while we look at you? Clay's chest heaved. The mill, he said, the word breaking into three, downriver. Easy's. Got a plan. Who? Prue demanded, but the question didn't need answering. Was, Tamsin said. Her mouth went dry the way flour does when a sack tears and air takes its share. He's after the rest of the records. May spat. The miller keeps the grain ledger for the town council, she said. Waits. Lots owed. Proof not in Decker's pocket. She wiped her hands on her apron and reached for the iron bar. Without realizing she had. We go. Gideon looked at Tamsin. She shook her head once. We all go, she said. No more splitting until the sun comes up. Prue stared at the copies. The pages, hide them in the coal scuttle. May said, nodding toward the stove. Ash is the best safe God ever made. They shoved the wrapped packets deep into the black grit where no one with clean fingers would look. Tamsin left the main ledger on the table, alive as a dare. May doused the lamps. They left by the back and slipped along blacksmith fences and garden lines where night did its best to erase the idea of edges. The mill sat like a squat patient animal at the bend, where the creek decided what kind of river it wanted to be. Its wheel clacked in a rhythm that had married more mornings than the pastor had. Lantern light moved inside the bobbing arrogance of men who think their hands are invisible because they work in a place the town owes them. Gideon held up a palm before they stepped into the mill yard. Wait, he breathed, and let the quiet tell him its math. The cough again, closer now, and Decker's voice pretending friendliness the way a snake pretends rope. Easy, Decker said inside. No need to drop the whole pile in the water. Just the last month's page books. Old debts can be forgiven. New ones need to be corrected. The laugh he made gave everything away that the words pretended not to. The miller, old Rusk with flour permanent in his eyebrows like snow that refused to move off a roof, mumbled protest. Tom'll skin me if I ruin their sons. They'll thank you, Decker cooed, for making the numbers match what they should have been all along. Tamsin's fists made themselves into something useful without her asking. She had no taste for hero speeches in doorways. She liked work done at right angles and with both hands. Gideon leaned close. Front, back wheel, he whispered. May wheel. I was born leaning on one, May said. Go. They went. Gideon took the front with a steady walk that made the dog under the porch decide not to bark. Tamsin slid to the back where the loading door stood ajar to the river smell. May vanished toward the wheel, which creaked and then went still, sulking in its puddle of borrowed water. Inside, Decker turned at the change in the room's breathing. His lantern through his face, big against a pillar. The face tried to look like law and landed somewhere on clerk and bully. Clay Boyd's cough accompanied him like a drum with a hole in it. A third man stood by the sacks, Thad Kersey, who could be bought with beer and a place to spit. Well, Decker said. The vaudeville troupe. He took in Gideon's calm. Tamsin's eyes, May's iron shadow at the window. He did sums and decided to bluff instead of count. You're too late. Rusk the miller hunched over his ledger like a hen over chicks. They ain't touched it, he protested, and groped at the ink bottle as if he could pour more truth in, and have it count as weight.tamsin, crossed the room and put her hand on the miller's wrist. Thank you, she said, and meant it. With a weight she'd save him with later when the town tried to decide whether to be grateful. Decker smiled with only a knife. Ledger after ledger, he said. Your kind of pornography. Your kind of fear. Tamsin returned and looked to see what he had brought besides bravado. The answer lay neatly arranged near the far wall. 2 sticks of dynamite with their fuses wrapped around them like ribbons around a maypole. Thad. Kersey looked at them with the attentive pride of a man who liked fire, but didn't like the math behind it. Double quotes. Oh. May said from the doorway with an appreciation that surprised even her. That's ambitious. Decker's grin softened. We had a fire already tonight, he said. Seems a pity not to see it through. Gideon took 1 step, small as a habit. You set that off and the wheel goes, he said. The spillway too. Water takes the grain shed. Half the lower street floods on a fast run. Decker shrugged. Accidents happen in towns without order. He lifted the lantern. It's light. Found the fuse end and licked with interest. You'll all tell a good story about how brave you were. Don't, Tamsin said. Not plead, not command. She might as well have said stop winter for all the effect it had on a man who liked. To hear the shape of the word don't and find himself in its echo. Thad's hand twitched toward the dynamite the way a moth tests a candle edge. Gideon's hand was already there. A flat slap that moved Thad's fingers aside with the courtesy you give a toddler near a stove. May slid in, fast as hot iron through water, and put her palm on the sticks. You keep those quiet, she said. And the dynamite did, surprised to have a woman hold it like bread dough. Decker snapped his fingers, annoyed to find the scene refusing its choreographer. Boyd, he said, take the girl's book. Clay looked at Tamsin, and then at May, and then at Gideon. He measured the path and found lengths of promise and trouble. He wheezed and didn't move. Decker snarled. Fine, he stepped toward the door, movements quick and beautiful in a way ugliness sometimes can be when it's sure of itself. He threw the lantern. Gideon swore once and with precision. The lantern cracked against the far post and spilled its small lake of light onto the floor and the sack stacked there. Flame ran swiftly toward corners, pleased with the amount of new house it would have. Gideon ordered, hands already busy with an empty grain scoop beating flame flat. May shoved the dynamite under a water trough where even sparks would have to learn to swim to find it. Rusk grabbed the ledger under Tamsin's hand and thrust it at her, as if to say you carry this better than I ever did. Decker bolted for the back door and found Tamsin in it. He jerked in surprise, then smiled slow at the memory of her in the alley behind the mill the day before. Always here, he said, always saying no. Practice makes it easy, she answered, and turned sideways to let him think he'd have to touch her to get past. Men like him waste time deciding where to put their hands. Time is the thing you take when you want to win without moving. He hesitated. Gideon's scoop slapped a flame. May kicked a burning rag toward a corner, where it could burn itself bored. Rusk whined at his wheel as if the machinery needed apology. Decker chose speed over thought. He drove his shoulder into Tamsin's collarbone and shoved. Pain burst down her arm like a pan of boiling water. She let his weight slide past and snatched his wrist where the tendons stand up proud. She twisted. He screamed not for pain, which men like him rarely admit, but for the offense of being moved. Clay Boyd lunged to help his master and ran full into Gideon, who didn't have a hand free to punch and so chose a better tool, his hip. He turned and let Clay's momentum make choices for both of them. Clay went headfirst into the sacks and came up with flour in his beard like shame in a churchgoer's hymn. Go, Gideon told Tamsin, not looking at her, trusting she'd take the right load. She took at the ledger and the other one too. The choice to leave Decker to May and Gideon, because pride makes people dumb where pages don't burn, but men do. She ran through the back and into night. The river sound met her like a friend who had not thought she'd come tonight and was delighted to be wrong. The wheel creaked again as May threw the catch and let water drown what wanted to be fire. Sparks whirled out the back door and died. Before they found gossip to spread dot at the front, voices tangled Owen's bewilderment, Creel's high complaint, a child's question about whether God liked fire. Tamsin wanted to lie down in the grass and sleep for a small while, but morning was a thing you had to chase in order to claim. Decker fought free of Gideon, slippery with rage and sweat. He bolted across the yard and into the trees along the bend, choosing the kind of dark men mistake for safety because it only hides them from the people who want them stopped. May caught Clay by the scruff and clanked him against the door. Rusk dusted flour from his eyebrows and decided to call it snow because he needed to feel like a different man for 5 minutes. Gideon reached Tamsin, breathing hard in a way that wasn't tired. You hurt? Yes, she said. A little everywhere. She lifted the ledger. But this isn't. They walked back to the forge under a sky that seemed to approve of survivors. May muscled Clay into the shop's side room and fixed him to a peg with a length of chain she'd set there for a horse that had never come. You want water? She asked him politely, then left before he could answer, because his yes would have been ugly dot inside. Prue sat on the stool with her hands in her lap, as if they were beautiful and she had just noticed. When Tamsin and Gideon entered, she stood. Too fast and then steadied as though steadying was a new skill she could learn as quickly as grief. You were right, she said, not pretending relief, that cheap cousin of joy. They came. They'll come again, Gideon said. Let them, Tamsin answered. We'll be busier. Dawn bled up behind the livery with the pale determination of a woman choosing to step out into the street again after men have tried to teach her the house is safer. Birds tried 3 songs and picked the one that matched the light. The town looked at itself in the wash basins on porches and decided to put on the clean shirt anyway. Tamsin crossed to the Temperance Hall steps with the ledger under her arm and smoke in her hair. She set the book on a box that someone had dragged up to serve as a pulpit, because men like to feel tall even when talking. Creel arrived with his Bible, his hair cut short where fire had insisted on giving him a new style. He glanced at the book and then at Tamsin and then at the sky, as if looking up could make God descend between them and rewrite the story with more flattering pen. We will hold the book here, Tamsin said before he could. Until the noon stage, then it rides. To whom? Creel asked lightly. His voice practiced humor like a man practices handwriting he won't use. To those who write the laws you like to read to women, she said. Men who went to school to hold more than one book at once. Creel's smile cracked. He plastered it. Very droll. Very done, May said, coming up with a tin mug of coffee in each hand as if to rid the morning of hangovers. She gave one to Creel because kindness is its own armor, and the other to Tamsin because leaders giddy on righteous flame forget to drink, and that's when they fall faint for all the wrong reasons. Gideon leaned on the post at the edge of the steps, hat low, eyes not. Owen stood near him, one hand on the stock of a rifle he hadn't earned, the other flapping uselessly at a fly, because even flies respect no badge. The crowd gathered itself again, smaller than the night before, but made of more spine. Walt Jenkins had Eli on his shoulder. The boy pointed at everything and named it a new way. Hetty and Prue came together and did not touch but left their elbows near enough that the air between them learned Brace. Morgan, the banker, cleared his throat like a man, thinking about taking an oath where people might remember. Miss Calder, he said, eyes on the ledger. There's a way this could go that don't ruin us. Settle the Voss accounts to zero. Hand the ledger to me to hold, and I'll hide it, May finished. You poor man. You truly think a bank can sit on fire and keep the walls cool? Morgan reddened the way raw wood does when you rub it too fast. I think we survive better when we take small bites of justice, he said. Saves the teeth. Tamsin shook her head. I'm done with small bites, she said. I've been gnawed enough. Gideon's mouth twitched in a way that meant agreement and a desire not to get in the way of his own admiration. The town began the awkward business of guarding. Men took turns by the step with rifles that might shoot straight if asked politely. Women made a net of eyes. Children sat on the hall stoop and counted to numbers higher than they'd tried before, because counting what you guard makes it real. At 10, May left with her packet tucked into a grain sack wrapped in a shawl, wrapped in a lie that would make a thief yawn. She took the east road at a blacksmith's amble, and was gone in 10 minutes with a wave that could have been hello and goodbye, both. At 11, Walt Jenkins's sister Martha, handsy, loud in the ways a woman earns when she raises 3 sons, alone tucked the second packet under Eli, who slept with the dedication of the newly rescued and climbed into a borrowed buggy. Gideon rode 10 yards back, grumbling to his horse about stupidity, so the horse would know he meant to be brave where it mattered. Tamsin sat. She did not like sitting. Her bones wanted useful. Watching the ledger was useful, and she told herself. So then told her bones to believe it. Creel hovered, the way a man hovers when he has decided to be patient, because he has determined that patience will look like righteousness later in the story. Hetty Vale approached at last. She held her hands in front of her, as if they were a paper she had to present to a clerk. I've been cruel, she said. Sometimes to make a point, sometimes to feel like I had one. Tamsin let silence hold the shape of acknowledgement, and not pardon. You can pay, she said, and took no pleasure in how Hetty flinched. Not me, the women who owe Decker on paper and owe him more in rooms with curtains. Start with Prue, then walk house to house where the name's on page 27. Leave flower, leave coin. Leave apology at the gate, and don't look for it to be invited inside. Hetty nodded as if the words were stitches she'd have to push through denim. I will. She glanced at the ledger. And when the judge writes back, Tamsin looked past her to the road. We'll be done waiting by then, she said. We'll have chosen. At 11:30, the day turned strange without warning the way days do when they plan a storm. The air went still, the heat doubled back. Far downriver, a flock of birds rose and scattered as if someone had clapped a hand over their nest. Owen's hat brim twitched in a non-existent breeze. Creel's hand went to his collar as if to adjust a weight that had not been there and now was. Gideon returned at a canter, dust skidding off his horse's flanks like questions. He slid to the step, breath neat, eyes not. Martha made it too. The toll bridge, he said. She'd be at the county road in an hour, unless, he stopped. Unless? Tamsin asked. Unless the men who rode past me pretend they weren't riding past me, he said. 3, not from here. One with a scar like a parenthesis pulled too hard. Decker's hired, May's voice floated up from behind them. She had reappeared like a blade where it's needed. How she had circled so fast would be a story she'd never tell. Railroad boys out of Canton. They like to call themselves adjusters. Creel's color lifted. There is a way to, he began, and stopped when Tamsin's look reached him. I mean, perhaps we should stop worrying about what seems decent and think about what is, she said. Owen, go find Walt's eldest, the one with the good rifle and the bad excuses. Put him by the livery. Put Morgan by the bank with a chair so he has to sit on his hands. You, she pointed at Arlen Finch, who looked delighted. To be named in anything but a funeral. Get on the church roof and play something happy and loud if you see riders I shouldn't. Arlen blinked. How will a fiddle, birds, Tamsin said. "Play and they'll lift. We'll know to look." Arlen climbed, and in a minute the first reel slid off the steeple into the noon heat, ridiculous and right. Birds rose in. Little eddies where the tune found nests. Tamsin's skin prickled. She felt wrong angles moving somewhere she couldn't see yet. She stood and touched the ledger. The boards were warm from sun, and some ugly part of her wanted to apologize to the book for dragging it into light. She pushed that part away. Books like this deserved glare. The noon stage rattled into the square with the bored efficiency of a man who had never seen courage and suspected it was an excuse for poor scheduling. The driver tossed the mailbag as if messages were potatoes. And potatoes were all men could digest. "Hold 1 minute," Tamsin called. "Hand up." The driver rolled an eye. "You got coin for my time?" "I've got a town that nearly burned and a ledger that might make it honest," she said. "That buys a minute." Gideon stepped off the boardwalk and into the road to secure the horse team with a hand on the bridle that said, "I am as calm as you need me to be, and more so." Owen hovered useless and then found a job. He walked the length of the coach and inspected the straps as if he had invented leather. Tamsin lifted the ledger. It felt heavier than it had at dawn, as if truth gained weight in daylight the way clay does when you walk in river shallows and it clings to your solace. She turned toward the stage door, and the far edge of the square rippled. Men rode in 3 abreast, clean in a dirty way. Their hats were the kind Canton sells to men who don't intend to sweat in them. One had the parenthesis scar. Another chewed a matchstick as if it kept him from biting the world outright. The third smiled without using his eyes. Arlen's tune skittered. Birds lifted in a stuttering cloud. People found reasons to be elsewhere on the street with the kind of skill that is really muscle memory. "Good noon," the smiling man called, and meant to be heard as far as the bank. "We're looking for a public record. Been told the town keeps it in a box for convenience." His glance slanted toward the ledger. "Paper makes a fire hazard if it's going to sit so near a street." "No smoking," May said helpfully, and rested her iron bar against her shin as if it were a cane she'd learned to rely on. Creel lifted his hand as if to welcome visitors who would make it easier for him to be who he preferred to be. "Gentlemen," he began, "we're in possession of evidence." Tamsin cut in, eyes on the men. "Evidence of fraud and assault. You can see it from the jail if you want a tour." The parenthesis-scarred man spat neatly and looked pleased with how far it went. "We'll be seeing the book now," he said. "Boss likes his arithmetic to stay between him and the page." "We like air and sunlight," Tamsin said, and walked down the step into the street. She did not hold the ledger out. She didn't hold it back. She kept it tucked to her side like a baby who intends to see its first summer. The smiling man dismounted without hurry. He had a way of walking that said he liked to be mistaken for kind. "Let's be sensible," he said, smile inching in. "You're brave. We're practical. Practical usually wins because brave gets tired." "I've been tired a long time," Tamsin said. "Brave is easier." The man's smile frayed. He nodded to the parenthesis scar, who swung down and moved toward Gideon with the relaxed shoulders of a man who expects to place his hand where he wants to. He put that hand out. Gideon's palm met it, and the parenthesis scar discovered that his hand was now somewhere it didn't understand, a place where another man's fingers could read the bones of it and ask them questions they'd never answered. "Leave," Gideon said, gentle as weather you can work in, "or you'll forget your horse's name by evening." Something like dislike flickered through the man's eyes. He took his hand back and looked at it as if it had betrayed him. Then he laughed because his kind of men laugh when they are afraid. Their inside voice might say a thing other than brave. Tamsin noted how the matchstick chewer hung back, how the smile twitched each time Gideon moved, how all 3 looked not at her face when she spoke, but at the ledger when she breathed. Knowledge is a set of pins you wear in your hair, small, sharp, invisible to anyone who isn't listening. The smiling man took off his hat and ran a hand through hair as if to show he possessed the human condition. "Last try," he said. "You. Hand us the book. We write out. Everybody adds this to their list of stories they don't tell their children." "Or?" Tamsin asked. "Or we break enough things that the story tells itself," he said, and glanced at the stage as if a coach were a thing chairs grow into when left alone. Gideon stepped forward, not between them, but into their expectation, which is a far better place to stand. "You've got a third option," he said. "You turn around and set a new course for your day. Try being the men your mothers told strangers you were. Who says she had a mother?" The parenthesis scar snorted and drew a smile from his friend that had the weight of stones in pockets. Before Tamsin could decide whether to believe the noon could get any sharper, Clay Boyd's cough sounded from the alley, and then the shape of it walked into the square. His face carried a darkness that didn't belong to smoke. It belonged to being told a job and failing at it. He pointed his chin at Tamsin. "Boss says to fetch the lady," he said to the Canton men. "Ledger, too. He's got the match to prove." "His mind. Where?" Gideon asked. The question landed softly because soft can carry further when hard as expected. Clay jerked his thumb toward the river. "The old mill. He stacked powder where the wheel used to turn." A string pulled tight under Tamsin's breastbone. Her body didn't ask her mind. It turned and ran. Behind her, Gideon swore less precise this time and followed. Owen bleated and then found his feet. May yelled at Arlen to keep playing because sound makes people look up when they should, and then grabbed her bar and her bucket and went. Creel called something about order that nobody saved for later. They hit the path along the water at a run. That turned both their lungs into hot cloth. Cottonwoods made shade in shreds. The wheel lay crooked where May had jammed it. The creek talked to itself about not wanting to be responsible for men's messes. Decker Vuss stood in the mills, open mouth with a coil of fuse in one hand and a pistol in the other. Behind him, the cool dark room where Rusk kept oil and augers had been rearranged to hold sacks of powder in a shape that made more sense than Tamsin wanted to look at. "Don't come closer," Decker sang. He seemed happy for the first time. All week, which told Tamsin a great deal about the kind of week he had liked. "I painted a straight line. When it burns the sum it equals. That's how math works. You never could count unless a woman's name was the unit," Tamsin said, breathing hard and refusing to be ashamed of it. "Put the gun down, Decker. You get one last chance to be small and live." He shook his head. "I was small every day you said no. Today I get to say no back." His eyes flicked to the ledger under her arm. "Set it down." She tightened her arm. "No." He lifted the pistol. The Canton men took positions without looking like they were taking positions. Gideon measured them, and in the measuring felt the slope under his boots steepen. "Tamsin," he said, not a warning so much as the sound a hand makes when it finds another in the dark. She stepped into the mill threshold and into the cool. It felt like standing inside the pause between two breaths, danger and relief the same temperature. So did his smile. "Come to me," he said. "Bring the book." Tamsin looked at the fuse, at the powder sacks, at the way the light pooled on the floorboards and made the line of black cord, a small river aimed at a lake of death. She looked back at Gideon. He had stopped 2 paces behind, exactly enough for her to take one without bumping him if she had to fall backward. His eyes were not calm and not wild. They were just so alive it hurt. "Let me," he said softly. "No." She said, "He wants you to be the one to run. He wants me to follow. He knows the shape of my stubborn." He winced a little because stubborn sounded like a word he had prayed for a friend who lived and died on it. "Then take the water," he said, nodding toward May's bucket, which had arrived and sat ready near the threshold, like a dog who'd learned sit and wait and please. Decker waggled the pistol. "No water," he said. "Not for the fuse. Not for the powder. You put that bucket down, you put the book down, you put yourself down in front of me. Or I write the ending myself. Tamsin took a step into the room and set the ledger on a shelf to her left where the shadow cloaked it like a shawl. She did it slowly so no man would shout that she had done it fast. She kept her eyes on Decker's and watched his eyes not follow. Her hands. She learned something about how he would choose to look when choices mattered. Gideon's breath made the air to her right. She felt him want to move and not move. May crowded the doorway behind them and fumed quietly like a forge banked. For later. Talk, Tamsin said, because every second a fuse doesn't burn is a second a woman gets to count. Tell me how this makes you strong. Decker's mouth twitched. He liked telling. It makes me the man who says what happens, he said. I've been the man who cleans up after what men with land say happens. I'm done with that. County judge is 2 days away, she said. You blow this mill and you blow yourself out of town. Even men who owe you are smart enough to hate the smell of burned grain. I'll buy noses, he said lightly. I always have. She felt the moment tilt. He had less to lose than she did. Men are most dangerous when they decide they don't need to carry their own names into mourning. She shifted her weight so her left foot found the board Gideon would have recommended. Last try, she said, and was surprised to hear her voice steady. Put the gun down. Leave the fuse cold. Walk into the square and say the words I'll help fix it. See how long you live. He laughed, delighted. You think that's a threat? That's your promise? His eyes slid to Gideon, then back. He dies first, he said, conversational as a consumer of pie. In your eyes. Then we decide whether the book burns or the town does. He raised the pistol. The room pulled its breath in until the walls held their boards like ribs. Gideon moved. He didn't lunge. He shifted the air, and the air rearranged the men. His shoulder met the smiling Canton man's sternum. The smile left. The scarred one drew and fired. The shot chewed a chip out of the doorframe and spat it at May, who spat back. Clay Boyd yelped and ducked. Thad Kersey found a sack to hide behind and discovered flour doesn't stop bullets, but will keep you honest about where you've been. Decker threw the fuse dot it arced. Black Serpent, toward the powder room. TAMSI, and leaped. She caught the fuse where it should have been too late and slapped it with her palm. It didn't light because Decker hadn't lit it, only pretended to. The laugh he made when she landed hard on one knee was the laugh of a boy who likes seeing a girl flinch when the snake turns out to be a rope. Practice. She panted up at him and felt foolish for having given him that joy. I'll keep practicing. Decker cocked the pistol instead. Try again, he suggested, and this time the suggestion came with fire at the fuse's tip. He tossed the match. The fuse took the flame like a compliment it had been waiting its whole life to receive. Hiss. Black cord turned orange and began to eat itself toward the room that promised to make it important. Gideon slammed the scarred man's hand into the door jamb until the revolver decided it loved the floor better. May swung the iron bar and introduced it to the match chewer's expectations. He fell and tried to find his teeth with his tongue. Clay Boyd ran outside and remembered his cough. Before his courtesy. Throw it, Decker said. Book, to me. Time lined up like thread through a dozen needle eyes. Tamsin's hand slid to the ledger's spine, felt the grooves her thumb had put there, the smudge of May's pencil on the corner, the dent where Prue had pressed it to her sternum while finding the door through smoke. She lifted it as if to throw. Gideon breathed once through his teeth. The scarred man mumbled a prayer that might have had a girl's name in it. May had her bar in both hands now without remembering moving it. Clay Boyd's cough found a rhythm and regretted it. Tamsin's arm went back. Decker's eyes followed. Behind him, the fuse made a sound like water finding a rock and not caring. She threw, not the ledger. The bucket dotted arced heavy, sloppy. Faithful. Decker turned too slow because men who expect books do not expect water. The bucket hit the doorway frame and burst into the room. The water found the fuse not with precision, but with abundance. Steam rose. The hiss turned into a squeal like a rat learning about justice. Decker's shot went wild. The ball tore splinters. From the post, 2 handspans from Tamsin's ear, and made the air ring like a struck plate. Gideon moved before the echo died. He crossed the yard and hit Decker with his shoulder, the way weather hits a tree that survived last year but grew the wrong direction anyway. They went down. The pistol flew. May's bar pinned it like a snake. The Canton men scrambled toward their horses, found Gideon's idea of a noose in the reins, and reconsidered. Clay Boyd ran toward the creek and hit the mud hard enough to make a small map. Of regret with his knees, Tamsin sprinted into the room. The fuse lay in a wet curve like a smile after remorse. She stamped the glowing end with her heel until it decided to be charcoal. The powder sack sweated in the dim, offended at being denied their moment. She listened for any sound a fuse could make after death and heard only her breath. Outside, creak of leather, slap of flesh, a grunt that said a nose would be flatter tomorrow. Gideon cursed once, then twice, both reverent as prayers. Decker snarled into the dirt and spat and lifted his head toward the river. Not over, he said through mud and teeth. Not by a mile. Tamsin picked up the dead fuse and held it in her palm like a snake skin. No, she said softly, and was surprised to feel no triumph in it. Not over, but less than it was. She turned to leave and saw the second fuse dot. It ran along the far wall behind the sacks, belly to the boards, quiet as a lie that knows when to speak. It burned bright and small, nearly to the gap under the powder room door, where the shadow had been thick enough to hide what men had done in secret while she watched the obvious. Gideon, she said, not loud and not calm, there's another. He glanced up from Decker, took the room's measure, and swore in a way that made the creek stop talking and listen. Get back, he said. Now she ran. The second fuse slid under the door with the smug speed of a rumor that finally had its moment. Water wouldn't find it unless someone crawled for it. The bucket was empty. There was another by the wheel, a lifetime away in paces. She skidded on flour grit and hit the door with her shoulder. The wood gave a little. Not enough. She slammed. Again, breath-tearing. The door moved a finger. Behind it, in the packed dark, Powder asked a question nobody wanted to answer. Tamsin. Gideon yelled. He was at the threshold now. Decker kicked away under May's iron. Leave it. No, she said. Not this one. She shoved the door with the weight of everyone who had ever pushed against men's math and found the hinge. Had rusted in contempt. It gave half an inch. Smoke, thick and sweet the way death is when it's careful, breath through. She slid her hand into the gap. Splinters bit. Heat bit harder. She felt for the live wire, the small hot thread, the line that would teach the rest of the room its new name. Her fingers brushed it. Pain tore through her palm like a promise being kept by a god. You didn't worship Dot, she grabbed anyway. The fuse danced under her skin, a living thing angry to be held. She pinched and pulled. It broke. It burned her. It fought like a boy. She dragged the glowing inch out into the light and ground it under her heel. The smell of hair and hope burned together. She panted, forehead against the door, and stared at her palm. Blister rising, skin white where the flame had licked. The room didn't explode. The wheel creaked a small sympathetic complaint. Behind her, Decker's laugh came back, low and filthy with admiration that wouldn't wash. You married to him yet? He asked the air. Because if you live, you'll be. That's how heroes are made. A woman too brave and a man who can't bear it alone. Gideon said a word that had more letters than the prayer book admits, and hit Decker once more to teach him to stop shaping air with his ugliness. The Canton men crawled away on their knees with their hands up, as if they had seen for the first time. How high ground can be when you spend your life in ditches. Owen arrived, panting and heroic, because arriving late to a fight is safer and lets a man feel like he chose it. He put cuffs on the men who would take them and pointed his gun at those who wouldn't. Creel stood on the bank pretending he had brought the river. Tamsin stepped into the yard, palm held at her chest like a bird she meant to release later, when the light was kinder. The ledger sat where she'd left it on the shelf, shadow blanketed, safe as anything gets in a town that learns fast and slowly. "Wrap that," May said, already tearing a strip of her own apron. "You're not losing the hand you need to write with." Her fingers were deft and angry on Tamsin's skin. "Damn him," she added for punctuation. "Damn him," Tamsin agreed, not religiously. She swayed a little because Bone knows when. "It's been asked to do a week's work in an hour." Gideon's hand hovered and then didn't. He steadied her waist with a touch so careful she had to close her eyes to bear it. "Stage," he reminded softly, "then we chase the copy." She nodded. "Go," she said. "I'll bring this." She tucked the ledger again, its weight a thing she had made peace with when she heard it hit the boards in the hall the first time. They started up the path toward the square, the creek scolding behind them. Decker's voice followed, sing-song. "Ugly, you'll run out of water, you'll run out of hands, you'll run out of men." Tamsin didn't look back. "I ran out of patience first," she said. "That's where you lost." They reached the square as the stage driver snapped the reins, bored enough to leave the story unfinished if it meant supper on time. Gideon waved an arm and the driver grumbled to a stop because some gestures carry farther than coin. Tamsin handed up the ledger to the driver in a motion that felt like handing a child to a stranger, because the stranger has the right horse. "County seat," she said. "Hand to the clerk. Tell him Tamsin Calder of Brackenridge will come behind it with witnesses and a blacksmith who doesn't miss." The driver took the book with a grunt that might have meant apology for earlier. "You got coin?" he asked softer. "Charge the temperance fund," May called, and the laugh the square made had medicine in it. The stage rolled. Dust lifted and fell on the faces of men who were learning to live with their own. Arlen played something that could have been a tune or just an idea of one that matched the day's lurch toward righteous. Tamsin stood very still and felt the ache of her hand, and the weight that had gone off her arm and the new one that had settled in her ribs. Gideon looked down the east road where Martha was a speck. May rolled her shoulders and called her forge back to her with her eyes. A shot cracked from the river road, not a warning. "Not a miss," screams answered. Men ran the way men run when they realize their bodies know more about fear than their mouths. Gideon swore and swung into his saddle like a man who has always known. He'd die riding or praying, and decided riding looked better in daylight. Tamsin ran. Her burned hand throbbed like a heart outside her chest. May grabbed her bar and kept up. They rounded the livery and saw it. The buggy tilted at the ditch, wheels splintered. Martha scrambling. Eli screaming from a tangle of shawl and harness. A man stood in the road with a smoking carbine and a face that was wrong in a way no scar could explain. He wore a preacher's collar undone and a string of men's wedding bands on a cord around his neck like trophies a magpie would have liked. He grinned at Tamsin as if she were a habit he had been hoping to meet. "Afternoon," he said. "I hear there's work for me in Brackenridge." Gideon's horse skidded. He flung himself out of the saddle and into cover, muzzle up. The man's carbine swung toward the sound with a lover's ease. May lifted her iron and wished it weighed more than a gun. Tamsin froze because movement would make someone choose, and she hadn't yet learned this man's choosing. "Martha," she said, the word a string between mouths. "Down." Martha dropped. Ayla's cry knifed the air and carved a piece of Tamsin's soul out for later. The man with the bands touched one between thumb and forefinger. "Names?" he asked pleasantly. "Tell me your names." I like to introduce myself properly. The moment sharpened to a point that would pierce or pin, and Tamsin tasted metal on her tongue. She lifted her chin. I'm the woman you miss, she said, and stepped sideways, putting herself where the man would have to refocus. He did. He slid the carbine mouth toward her like a wolf, moving a snout to the throat that mattered. Gideon rose from cover because some men's mathematics are just this bad and this beautiful. The banded man's smile widened. His finger tightened. The carbine barked, and the world seemed to pause, breath held on the edge of breaking. And then snapped. The carbine's report ripped the noon open. Tamsin didn't see the bullet so much as feel the air get punched. Gideon turned, dragging Martha with him by the shoulder of her dress. The shot took his hat clean off and stitched a hot line across the outer meat of his arm. He grunted anger more than pain and shoved Martha belly flat into the ditch where weeds could be shields for once. "Aile," Tamsin said to the screaming bundle, already moving. She ran at a diagonal that taught the man with the bands not to trust where a woman would appear next. Dust-lipped. The smell of hot leather cut the breath. The banded man didn't flinch. He had a hunter's stillness that made the world look like something hung on a nail. His collar lay open under his throat, a priest's joke in a place God might not visit. The rings around his neck chimed soft as coins. "That's a fine trick," he said, carbine swinging to meet Tamsin's line anyway. "But I've seen diagonals before." May O'Rourke came in from the left with her iron bar low, like a scythe that had formed private opinions. She didn't rush. The bar didn't like to be rushed. Owen arrived behind her, and then remembered he was supposed to be useful. He set his jaw and pulled his revolver with two hands, as if the gun might skitter away if not supervised. "Name." Tamsin called, because names hold men whether they admit it or not. She kept moving, legs a metronome, ribs tight so breath didn't jounce where fear wanted to. The man smiled. It made his face worse. "Harlan Creed," he said with odd courtesy, and rolled the name in his mouth like smoke. "Out of Canton this month, out of God a long time. You're Tamsin Calder. You stand where men think they ordered you to sit." He brought the carbine to his shoulder. Gideon fired from cover. Creed's hat jumped. The bullet sheared a piece from the brim and made daylight where shade had been. Creed didn't duck. He turned calm as a clerk at a counter put 2 rounds toward Gideon's voice and walked the third toward the buggy where the copy lay under Eli's small sacred. "Wait. Don't," Tamsin said, and didn't know whether she meant the gun or the man. Creed smiled again. "Ask right," he said. She understood, hated that she did, and used it. "Ask me," she said. "Ask me instead of the baby." She kept moving. May was nearly within the bar's reach. Her eyes were on Creed's knees. Gideon shifted position. The way a tree puts its shadow where shade matters most. Owen's hands trembled and settled. Like a millpond finally finding its shore. Creed cocked his head and regarded Tamsin as a thing to appraise. "All right," he said. "You give me the packet, the one that makes men poor and women loud." His carbine's muzzle pointed vaguely at Eli and trembled not at all. Under the shawl, Martha rasped from the ditch, suddenly guilty for smart choices. "Under. Quiet," Gideon said, and Tamsin saw the way fear corrals love into mistakes. She reached the buggy. Eli flailed, his tiny fists contemptuous of every danger except the immediate hunger for air. Tamsin slid her good hand under him, found the roll of oilcloth, and palmed it into the sagging pocket of her apron in one motion she could have used to steal plums when she was 10. She lifted Eli free and felt his sob batter her burned palm. "Like apology." "There," she told him, voice low. "Make noise. It keeps you from stopping." Creed saw the packet disappear. His eyes narrowed in appreciation. "You're quick," he said. "We'll have lunch after." He lifted the carbine a thumb's width. Gideon fired again. The shot went wide. Creed's return snapped bark off. the cottonwood near Gideon's ear. A few leaves sighed down like small flags of surrender. Arlen Finch, still on the church roof, stopped his tune and pivoted his rifle to his shoulder with a care that made the instrument protest in its case. He took aim and then swore softly. Creed had put himself so the line to Tamsin ran through. Eli, men with music in them don't shoot through babies. He lifted the fiddle again and sought a warning into the wind instead. Birds rose along the alley, mouth where the Canton men waited, and May looked without moving her head. "Two more," she grunted. "Behind." "Hold," Gideon called, and Tamsin heard the whole weight of the word. It meant the line, the shot, the impulse. Creed shifted. The carbine's lip toward Tamsin's ribs. "Hand," he said amiably. "Pack it." The rings chimed when he breathed. She couldn't unhear them now. She had a decision and no time to dress it. Eli's heat bled through her bodice. Her burned palm pulsed. Pain taught her the geography of itself in fast little lessons. She took a breath, made it a tool, and threw the shawl into Creed's face. He shot anyway. The bullet went high. May's bar hit his forearm with a thwack that sounded like an argument ending. The carbine skittered, and Creed let it go rather than fight the bar twice. He stepped into May fast and inside the arc of the iron and drove, his elbow up toward her jaw. She tucked her chin and took the blow on the crown. Sparks danced across her eyes and made little bells ring in the dark. Owen fired, finally remembering why he'd come. Creed turned. The round took him in the shoulder and spun him 2 degrees toward his own blood. He blinked, considering annoyance. As a new input. "Deputy," he said, not angry. "You could learn." Gideon's boot thudded in the dirt. He closed the last steps like a man acquitting a debt and swung with no flourish, just a straight line from shoulder to jaw. Creed rolled with it. He moved like a river rock in current giving, surviving, waiting to bruise the next bare foot. He brought a knife out of nowhere and let sunlight teach it what it was. Tam Cyan kept moving. Stillness is a luxury women get only after funerals. She slipped Eli into Martha's ditch hollow and pressed the woman's hand over him, then stepped back into the triangle Gideon and May had drawn. Owen reloaded like a man trying to make music with thumbs. Arlen's tune broke into a reel that told anyone with ears how many men moved from the alley and how fast Creed showed his teeth. It wasn't a smile. "You don't need a book to burn a town," he said conversationally, eyes flicking over them as if choosing a letter. T for Tamsin, G for Gideon, M for May. "You just need a story men like better." "We've been living yours too long," Tamsin said, and threw a handful of gravel at his eyes. It wasn't meant to blind. It was meant to interrupt. It did. Gideon went low. May went high. Creed leapt and slid between like a boy born in barns and back doors. He cut for Gideon's ribs and net belt leather. Gideon's hand was already there, catching the blade under his palm, turning the cut into a line on skin instead of a hole. Blood came anyway, honest and immediate. He hissed. "Careful," Tamsin snapped, and hated herself for it, even as she loved him for not listening. Because listening would have cost something they couldn't pay. From the alley, the Canton men pounded in, faces already deciding this. Day hadn't been worth the coin. One lifted a pistol. Arlen's rifle cracked. The pistol flew, and the man shook his hand and stared at the empty. As if daylight had turned thief. Creed moved toward the buggy. Tamsin moved with him, the ugly dance of two people who loathe the rhythm but know how to count it. He made as if to lunge for Martha. She gave him teeth and elbows in return. He laughed. "You'll do," he told her, and went for the harness. Instead, cutting the traces so the left horse had nothing to think about but running. The horse bolted. The buggy lurched. Tamsin grabbed the wheel and felt wood try to break under her hands. Gideon seized the bridle on the right horse and hauled. The animal met him halfway with panicked trust. May slammed her bar against the spokes and made a sound that reminded the buggy it wanted to live long enough not to fall on a child. Creed knifed the last strap and the team wrenched free. The empty buggy slid toward the ditch and stopped because May's bar had decided to be a stake. Creed swore under his breath in a language made of ring metal and charlatan school and reached for the oilcloth now printing a shape against Tamsin's apron like a confession. She twisted. He got cloth, not packet. She let the apron strings give. The leather fell. The packet stayed in the inside pocket she'd stitched there for carrying letters for women who couldn't go to the post themselves. Good, she thought, even as his hand found her wrist and squeezed. Pain shot up to her shoulder like a wire being pulled through conduit. Give, he said. Drown, she answered, and tried to bring her knee where men deserve to feel it. He turned his hip and her knee met muscle instead of memory. He smiled. Like a schoolmaster when a student shows grit instead of grammar. Gideon hit Creed again. This time it landed on bone and said so. Creed's head jerked. The rings chimed. He fell back 2 steps, knife still honest in his hand. Leave, Gideon said. Blood on his sleeve and patience gone. You're not getting it. Creed touched. His cut with 2 fingers, as if testing a stain. Not today, he conceded pleasantly. But I like towns that learn me quick. I'll be staying. He nodded toward the river bend where willows wrote secrets into their reflections. Tell Voss I charge double when I have to work with amateurs. Voss is going to jail, Tamsin said. Daring truth to stand up to the face of a man who collects wedding rings. You'll be bored here. Creed's eyes brightened. I never am, he said, and stepped backward with the rare grace of a man who knew retreat didn't make a poem worse. Shoot him, Owen said, finally certain about something. No, Gideon said. Why? Owen demanded, outraged to find. Mercy happened without consulting him. Because he expects it, Tamsin said. And because his back tells us more walking than lying down. Creed laughed once, short, and vanished into the cutbank's shadow. The Canton men followed, leaving their bravado in a rattle that made the livery horse snort and stamp as if to crush it to grain. Silence fell in the square, the way rain falls on dust, a blessing that raises old smells. Tamsin's arms trembled. Around Eli. Martha kissed the child's hair with the kind of ferocity you save for after bullets. Gideon retrieved his hat, examined the hole the day had given him, and put it back on anyway because a man needs something between him and the sun when the sun begins to watch. May rested her bar on her shoulder and looked at Tamsin's palm. Sit, she commanded, voice back to forge order. Let me bind that proper before you forget to use it right, and it becomes a weather stick. There's no time, Tamsin said, but sat anyway because obedience to the right woman can be smarter than bravery. Gideon watched the river bend until it told him nothing more. Then he turned back, and in his face Tamsin read the new weight. Creed would not leave. Men like him stay until they can name a place after themselves, and don't mind if the name is Ash. Packet? He asked Dot. She tapped the hidden pocket under the apron. Here, she said. 1 copy east, handed off at the toll ranch. May said, wrapping Tamsin's palm with clean linen she seemed to pull from the air. Boy named Leon took it toward the paper like he was running from a whooping. He'll run faster toward coin. And the original's on the stage. Owen said, sounding proud of the stage as if he'd invented it. County seat'll have it before decent men stop eating lunch. Decent men eat slow when the meal is truth, May muttered. They choke easy. Creel arrived at last, breathless from trying to look like the man who appeared immediately. He took the scene in with eyes that preferred order to justice because it made preaching easier. We mustn't escalate, he began. We already did, Tamsin said, with paper instead of guns. Keep up, he flinched. There's no need. For disrespect. There's no room for delay, Gideon said quietly. Creed will not be the last man Voss can afford. He brought a sermon's collar so you'll be fooled 3 seconds longer than you should. He tipped his head toward the hall. Stand under a different motto for a while. Creel tightened his lips but, for once, did not answer. He looked. At Hetty, at Prue, at the child on Martha's lap. Shame, the honest kind, passed through his face like weather. What do you want me to do? He asked Tamsin, the miracle phrase of any man who used to tell her what she could. Put the church bell in the service of the town, she said. 1 ring for riders spotted, 2 for flame, 3 for law. Arlen plays until the bell tells. Him to stop. Creel nodded and went walking faster than dignity likes. When dignity worries, it has gone the wrong way. They fixed what they could quickly. Harness straps tied. Wheel splints lashed. Water brought in buckets and in clean words. Faces washed at the trough as if dirt were a thing that had a say in who was marked. Morgan the banker came, pale, with a ledger of his own clutched in both hands. He looked 20 years older in an hour and didn't know whether to resent the age or welcome the honesty it gave him. Tamsin, he said carefully, if the county seat takes the book and the judge excavates every bad debt, we'll hang half our town by the neck of poverty. Tamsin stood slowly because standing quick made the world pitch and faced him. You're right, she said. He blinked at the words, not expecting them to be on his side of the map. We'll hurt, but we'll hurt forward. Pay what's just. Forgive what's theft. Start again with weights that don't lie, and men who don't lend with their hands out and their flies open. He swallowed. You talk like starting again. Is easy. I talk like breathing, she said. You either do it or you die inventing reasons not to. He nodded once. It looked like a man putting down an anvil he had called a pillow. By late afternoon the square had learned to be a fort without looking like one. Women went about the business of ordinary clotheslines, bread, water on porch flowers. As deliberate as soldiers drilling. Men posted where shade would let them stand long without making stupidity. Children relearned games that kept them under eyes. Tamsin walked the perimeter with Gideon. Her burned hand throbbed less under May's clean work. The rest of her body throbbed in petty resentments that would compile a list for morning. She felt stretched thin and tight like a drumhead, and every footstep beat a small sound out of her willingness to be good. What does he want? She asked softly, meaning Creed and the men who hired him and the idea behind such men that outlived them. Gideon didn't answer at first, because he respected questions enough not to snatch at them. He wants to be the last story, he said. The one people tell after yours stops. He wants to be told, in rooms that smell like smoke and beer, as the man who made Brackenridge small again. Then let's get bigger, she said. He nodded. We start with getting to night, she nodded back. And then to dawn. At sundown the bell rang once riders spotted. The sound rolled over the roofs and into the bones of men who had learned to heed bells only on Sundays. Arlen's fiddle stopped, then slid into something lower, a sound like a creak worrying stone. May hefted the bar and spat iron dust without having any. Where? Owen called from the livery Eve. North Road, Arlen shouted back from the church roof. Come in quick but not close, maybe passing. The town held its breath and then let it out in small pieces as the riders went by without turning in. Tamsin found she had been holding Eli's name in her mouth like a seed. She put it down gently. Night came honest. Stars drilled their holes. The air cooled like a mercy promised and delivered. Brackenridge camped in its own streets and pretended sleep. Tamsin lay on May's shop floor with her shoulder blades counting every board as if memorizing friends. Gideon sat by the door, rifle across his knees, awake like a habit he had put on again without liking it. She dreamed badly, which is to say she dreamed true. Corn slats became ribs, ribs became ladders, ladders became prayers. She woke once with her burned hand singing, and found Gideon watching the seam where door met jamb, as if it could reveal more than the outside world. You should sleep, she whispered. "I'll sleep when the ledger writes itself," he said. "It already did," she said. "We just read it out loud." He smiled into the dark. "Then I'll sleep when men agree that reading counts." Dawn came pale and stubborn. Somewhere, a calf bawled at a fence. Somewhere else, a woman told a child to mind. The world insisted on continuing. Tamsin rose and washed in a basin May had made clean water into with the authority only blacksmiths and midwives possess. She bound her hair again, wincing at the small tender place where Creed had had his hand. She stepped out into the street and smelled bread. Bread means survival in any language. Gideon fell into step. "Stage'll reach the county seat by 10, he said. If the driver didn't decide his lunch mattered more. He looked like the kind who eats truth cold. She said. They turned up Main toward the hall to begin. Another day of guard duty that felt too much like work and too little like living. Creed's absence lay on the town like a scarf, warm until it became a noose. Arlen waved from the roof. "Morning," he called down. "I dreamt I played handle to a herd of stampeding cows, and they bowed in place." "Keep handle handy," May called back, stepping into the light with a tray of rivets as if to remind Metal it still had jobs to do. Tam. Dajan reached the hall steps and saw, with a confusion that turned to dread, that the box where they'd rested the ledger yesterday sat empty. Of course it did, she told herself. The book was gone on the stage. But someone had set a Bible in its place, creels, unblistered, with a new ribbon in a spot. On top of it lay a ring, the simple band of a laborer, plain gold, nicked by hammer. The rings around Creed's neck flashed through her mind. She bent. The ring was warm from the first light. Inside it, initials scratched with a nail. L plus Ma, Leon, May said behind her. Voice gone slate flat. "The boy," Gideon sighed. He looked east without moving his head. He took the copy. A thin scream floated from downriver. Not near, not far. The kind of sound a body makes when it hears its own name in a stranger's mouth. Tamsin ran before her mind could decide whether it was clever. Gideon ran with her. May ran like a forge with legs. The bell started 1, then 2, then 3 as if Creel had forgotten the code and decided more was better. They reached the bend where cottonwoods leaned hard enough to see their faces. The path had been scuffed by 3 horses and 1 boy's running. At the shallow, where stones teach ankles to mind, boot prints turned to a scuffle and a drag. There, on the bank, lay the oilcloth packet opened and empty, its string cut clean with a small, neat blade. Beside it lay another ring, this one twisted oval like a mouth trying to say no after the word had been taken. "Creed," Gideon said needlessly. May squatted and touched the torn string. "The boy?" She asked the river. The river did not answer. Tamsin swallowed breath until it obeyed her again. She turned slowly, eyes sliding over willow, shadow, light, sign. In the cattails a small dark smear said blood in a way dirt never could. "We follow," she said. "We shouldn't," Gideon said. "He wants us alone where the willows talk over us." "He already has the boy," Tamsin answered. "We are not leaving him to be added to a string because we like living." She bent and lifted the empty oilcloth. It felt like betrayal wrapped neat. They pushed into the green. Willow leaves kissed their faces with pointless intimacy. Mud sucked at their boots. On a tussock, a set of spat-out words lay like tracks. A prayer in Creel's voice, or something that sounded like it, low and hurried. "Creel?" May breathed, incredulity a hand over her mouth. "What would—" A shot snapped past her ear and took a leaf clean. "Duck," Gideon barked, and they did. The next shot planted itself in a tree, as if planning to grow there forever. Creed's voice came lazy from the right. "You brought a crowd. I thought you'd bring sorrow. This is easier." "Tie up the boy," Tamsin said, and hated the tremble she heard in her own voice. "Tied himself," Creed answered, amused. "I just explained the knot." He whistled. and somewhere a horse moved in a rhythm that wanted to be understood. As patience. Bring me Gideon Pike and the copy, and I return your messenger without an extra ring. No, Gideon said. Yes, Tamsin said at the same time. The words hit each other and fell. She looked at Gideon, at the set of his jaw, at the new line pain had drawn around his eyes, at the way his hand rested on the rifle, as if it were a friend, not a trick. We trade for the boy, she said. Then we take back what we can. Or we all die at once, May said, practical to the bone. I'm tired of dying in installments, Tamsin said. She stood, slow so Creed could enjoy thinking he'd made her cautious. Harlan, she called, pitching her voice to Carrie without breaking. You like fair. Take me. Let the boy run. Keep your shot for later when it feels braver. Gideon swore softly. No. You're not in charge of all my no's, she said without looking at him, and took 2 steps toward the voice. Creed laughed like a man getting exactly the present. He asked for, "Oh, I like you," he said. "But I didn't ride for you. I rode for the man behind you who used to be interesting." "Bring him." Gideon touched Tamsin's sleeve. "I'll go," he said. "You'll take the boy and run." "You can't outrun a man who enjoys the chase," she said. "You survive it by making him bored." She looked at May. "When I put my hands up, you make a loud mistake somewhere to our left." May grinned despite everything. "I have a gift for those." Tamsin lifted her hands, palms empty, the burned one wrapped and not shaking because it had learned a new stillness. "I'm coming," she called. "Slow," Creed said. "Like confession." She stepped off the path into green that made a room without a roof. The air smelled like crushed pennyroyal and old carp. Mosquitoes tested her skin, decided to wait for easier prayers. The mud gave and held. She thought of the corn crib and how light had made bars and how she had counted to find her way through. She counted now 1 step 2, 4 until counting became a rail her fear could hold to. "Stop," Creed said. That she stopped. Gideon had moved to the right, shadow and rifle both in the bend of the willow, eyes on her like a promise he didn't want to keep but would. May crept opposite, iron bar in one hand, a stone in the other, the bar for long stories, the stone for punctuation. "Where's the boy?" Tamsin asked. "Listening," Creed said, "and learning there is no such thing as rescue, only different kinds of being kept." "You don't know the first thing about rescue," she said, and then made herself not speak again, because men like him prefer conversation to consequence. The cattails swayed. A shape coalesced a dozen yards off Creed, relaxed, one hand low by his thigh, the other grazing a branch like a man casually reading the day's news. Behind him, tied to a willow with the neatest, ugliest knot, Leon stood, eyes wide as plates and just as useful for seeing. A strip of cloth silenced his mouth. His breath sought it. "Release the boy," Tamsin said. "I'm here." "Gideon." "Pike first," Creed said. "Step into the open, Mr. Pike, or I light up the part of the day you least wish to watch." He dangled a bit of fuse between 2 fingers and smiled as if he'd produced a flower. Gideon didn't move. "May," Tamsin said no louder than a thought. May hurled the stone left. It cracked against a cedar trunk and made an argument with echoes. Creed's head snapped, his gun came up. The echo lied about where the sound was born. Gideon rose into the space the lie made and fired. Creed fired back in the same breath. The birds exploded upward like flung coins. Leon flinched and tried not to cry with the effort. May charged through brush like a forge on hooves. Tamsin ran straight. She did not aim for Creed. She went for the boy. Creed swung toward her. Gideon shot him off that line. The bullet burned his sleeve and wrote a shallow sentence on skin. Creed swore first real anger all day and flung a second strip of fuse toward the mud at Leon's feet. It kissed a small tin dish she hadn't seen. Flame spooled to life like a flower that grew too fast. Tam. Sin flung herself at it without thinking and ground the fire into the river slick with her wrapped palm until Heat learned who ran this part of the world. Creed cursed her love of water. May's bar took his wrist, and the knife flew, and the rings sang a high, mean song as they bounced together. "Run," Tamsin told Leon, ripping the gag free. "Run now and don't turn back ever." Leon ran. He didn't look at her. That's how she knew he understood what gratitude looks like. For all we like to pretend it's a face. Creed kicked May in the knee. She went down on it and came up grinning because pain also tells the body it's still here. Gideon closed and they grappled, two men who had learned fighting after work, not before. Creed found the leverage he wanted, turned it, and in a breath had Gideon's forearm pinned and his pistol hand bent toward his own throat. "Choose," Creed sang to Tamsin. "Your preacher's fancy. Which man do you save? The one who thinks you hung the moon, or the town that hangs you under it when you stop lighting breakfast?" May moved to hit Creed from behind, and he heel-stomped her shin without turning. She hissed and kept coming anyway. Tamsin's breath sought her chest. She looked down the second copy's empty oilcloth in her fist and up Gideon's face. Quiet in the way men are when they plan to forgive you for choosing something else. The rings around Creed's neck chattered. The frog chorus below. The bank seemed to lean in to listen. "Neither," she said, and flung the empty oilcloth into Creed's eyes like a net. He tore it aside, enraged at the insult, but not the pain. Gideon twisted. The pistol skidded to the mud. May's bar swung and took Creed behind the knee. He went down on one leg. His body learned mud. The mud held on because mud loves men who hate to be touched. It would have ended there if the willow had been quiet. But it sighed just a little, like a child testing whether sleep meant safety, and the sound carried from behind them. The whip crack of a branch and the whispered scuttle of two more men in the brush. The parenthesis scar. The match chewer. Patient as afterthoughts. Creed smiled in the mud and closed his hand on the hidden pistol in his boot. "Tamsin," Gideon said, and there was no time left in his voice for any more words at all.